Going on school trips costs a lot, especially if you go to a private school. You're probably not used to these expenses since you went to public school. It might be too much for you to pay for it. But don't worry, I'll get you a souvenir. The teacher in charge of my daughter's class is really straightforward, but sometimes he sounds like he's talking down to her. No one should talk down to or ignore others, especially not a teacher to a student. I'm Natalie. My brother and I were left without parents when we were young because they died in a bad car crash. I was only 8, and my brother was 15. After our parents died, our relatives had to figure out what to do with us. We didn't have many family members, and no one had enough money to take care of both of us. They said, "We can't handle both of them because we're struggling to raise even one." They already had 2 kids of their own, so having twice as many was out of the question. We realized that all we had left in life was each other. I was just a 3rd grader, clinging tightly to my brother. I cried constantly, and he felt helpless seeing me go through so much. At 15, he was barely an adult, and I was still a child. He could only do so much to help. After a while, one relative agreed to take me in. "Sorry, but we can't take both of you," they said. "We thought one of you could stay with us, and the other could go to a foster home or shelter." I understood the situation, but I knew being separated would make things even harder. "Please take care of her. I'll go to the foster home," my brother insisted, sacrificing for me. "I'll be okay. Just because I'm in foster care doesn't mean I won't be looked after," he assured me, holding my hand tightly. He made me feel like I deserved it, like he wanted this for me. As he held my hand, I couldn't help but cry and beg him to stay. The family that took me in didn't seem too thrilled, and I always felt like a stranger in their home, like there was a divide between us. I felt so alone. The shelter where my brother stayed was really far away. It was tough being apart, but we kept in touch by phone whenever we could. Even though I was with my relatives, my brother was my only real family. Without him, I started feeling more and more alone. I've always been sensitive and creative. I love expressing myself and letting my imagination run wild. As I felt lonelier, my emotions got stronger, and I started withdrawing into myself. Through middle and high school, that feeling of loneliness stuck with me. I began pouring my feelings onto paper, crafting imaginative stories that flowed naturally from my mind. When I shared some of my writing with my brother, he praised it and urged me to keep going. He said, "This is something special." After graduating, I dove into job hunting. With my passion for reading, I landed a job at a small publishing company that focused on literary magazines. If it had been a bigger company, I might not have applied, not because I wasn't qualified, but because it wouldn't have felt right for me. I put everything I have into my writing. It's kind of an obsession for me. I wanted to show my gratitude to the family who took me in and reassure my brother that I'm doing fine. Starting my first job was tough, and I made my fair share of mistakes, but I kept pushing myself, and before I knew it, 5 years had flown by. At the time, I was working in the editorial department, assisting one of the top writers. This writer had real talent and even won an award for his work. As his editor, I did my best to help him whenever he hit a roadblock. I shared my creative insights and gave feedback to help him improve. When my boss praised me, saying, "Natalie, I don't know what I'd do without your creative mind," it felt incredible. We had a strong bond in our working relationship. And then he surprised me by saying, "Natalie, you're not just the perfect partner at work, but in life too. Will you marry me?" I was totally caught off guard by his proposal. It was unexpected, especially since we hadn't openly dated or been romantically involved. But considering how close we were from working together, we knew a lot about each other. So I said, "Yes, I want to spend forever with you." And it just felt right. My brother was thrilled about our wedding. We hadn't spent much time together since we lived apart, so I couldn't wait to see him again. My husband understood how important it was for me to reconnect with my brother, and he was looking forward to meeting him too. My husband told me about his involvement with the shelter and the kids there. He didn't just contribute financially, he was actively mentoring and supporting the children. "There's one kid in particular who really stands out," he said. "He's driven and hardworking. And he even calls me Big Bro." He was glowing with pride, and I couldn't help but feel proud of him too. 2 years into our marriage, we were getting ready to welcome a new addition to our family. My husband's writing was gaining recognition, and he credited it to my advice and support. "Thank you for always believing in me. I love you," he'd say, making me feel so appreciated. Our daughter, Nicole, was born, and our lives were filled with joy and excitement. She was bursting with energy, and we were over the moon. One day, as I looked in the mirror, I realized that the loneliness and sadness I once felt had vanished. I smiled at my reflection, feeling grateful for everything I had overcome. Nicole blossomed into a kind and bright child. Before we knew it, my husband and I decided to enroll her in a private school. We found one that focused on nurturing independent and creative thinkers, offering a well-rounded education in academics, athletics, and the arts. Nicole thrived in that environment. Our careers were going well too. But when Nicole started 4th grade, we received devastating news about my husband. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and it had already spread too far for treatment by the time we found out. We went to the hospital together, but I returned home alone. I stayed by his side, praying for a miracle, but it wasn't meant to be. I was scared that the loneliness I once felt would return, but this time I had Nicole. I had to stay strong for her. I changed my mindset and focused on moving forward. Nicole and I leaned on each other for support as we faced life without my husband. Every moment became more precious, and I vowed to cherish every second. As Nicole started her final year of elementary school, she was nervous about meeting new classmates and teachers, but she knew she could handle it by the time. As the first semester ended, I noticed Nicole became increasingly quiet about school, especially after spring break. Starting the second semester of 5th grade, she seemed even more distant. My worry grew. Was she not enjoying school? Was she being bullied? But as the second semester neared its end, nothing changed. Today, I had to confront her. I couldn't ignore it any longer. "Hi, I'm Nicole, and I'm in 5th grade. Last year, my dad passed away, and it was really tough for me and my mom. But my uncle helped us through it, and I'm grateful my mom was able to heal. I was excited to start 5th grade, even though I knew I have a new teacher and classmates, except for one friend from last year. Our teacher is 28 and has been teaching for 6 years. He kind of gives off an older, annoying brother vibe. Our teacher wanted to get to know us better, so he had us fill out a get-to-know-me worksheet. Then he planned to interview us individually based on our answers. When it was finally my turn, he said, 'Your favorite subject is English, right?' I love reading too. But then he mentioned my dad's passing and my mom raising me alone, and I didn't like his tone. 'Just wondering, what does your mom do for work?' My mom works as a contract employee at a publishing company. After my dad passed away, she switched from full-time to contract work for the flexibility. I told her she didn't have to, but she prefers it. It's kind of like working part-time. How do you guys afford the school? You must be having a tough time." It felt like my teacher assumed we were barely getting by. It didn't seem sincere. Then he made more comments about our finances, like he pitied us, like we were pathetic. His attitude during that conversation really bothered me, so I tried to avoid him afterward. But he kept approaching me, usually when I was alone, and would say things like, "Struggling with money is stressful, right? Is your mom still working part-time? Can you afford next semester's tuition?" I tried to brush it off and be mature about it. Once, I even argued back, saying we weren't poor, but he didn't stop. So I decided it was best to keep my distance. He laughs and thinks it's because he's right. I decided to stop talking to my mom about school altogether because I didn't want to involve her. I could tell she was getting worried about me. Then, over spring break, my teacher assigned us a book to read, a popular novel by an author named Curie. The main character had a tough childhood but eventually succeeded in life. After class, my teacher approached me when I was alone. "That book starts with a rough childhood, which I bet hits close to home for you," he said. "But let's be real, life isn't like a fairy tale. People from poor backgrounds usually stay that way. It's a cycle, you know?" He laughed and sarcastically apologized for making me read it. I felt so alone and powerless. I couldn't believe he was my teacher. I dreaded going back to school after spring break. I wanted to change my attitude to stop worrying my mom, but my teacher kept picking on me. I couldn't understand why he enjoyed taunting me. I tried ignoring him, but one day I couldn't take it anymore and snapped back. He was speechless at first, then angry. As he walked away, he muttered, "You're a feisty one, aren't you? I'll remember this." That's when I realized I should have just ignored him. At the end of the school year, there's this big 5th grade field trip everyone's excited about, even though it's not happening yet. People in class started buzzing about it, and once again, the teacher singled me out. "Those school trips are pricey, especially compared to public schools. Wonder if you'll have to sell the house to afford it," he said with a smirk. "I'm looking forward to it, but hey, don't sweat it if you can't make it. It's a luxury, and you've got more important things to worry about. Better to stay home." He even hinted it would be better for the school if I didn't go, like payback for snapping at him. Then there was this incident where a classmate's Nintendo Switch went missing. The teacher insinuated that kids from poor families might have stolen it out of jealousy, looking straight at me. My friend started asking questions, but I kept quiet to avoid his smart remarks. Later, when we were discussing middle school plans, the teacher suggested I reconsider staying at the private school. He doubted my mom could afford it and suggested we look into public school instead. He kept belittling us, saying it's stupid to stretch beyond our means. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of the conference, tears streaming down my face. I was so frustrated with him. When I got home, my mom sat me down and asked what was really going on, so I told her everything. I was speechless hearing my daughter's words. I couldn't believe she'd been dealing with harassment at school, especially from her teacher. She didn't want me to worry, so she kept it all inside. I hugged her tight, apologizing for not knowing. I knew I had to talk to the teacher right away. I decided to record our conversation on my phone, just in case. "I assumed you'd be working hard, just like I am." His response confirmed my daughter's story. I demanded to know why he felt entitled to speak so horribly to Nicole. It was my duty as a parent to make her aware, even though it should be his job as a teacher, a responsibility he seemed to overlook. He had the audacity to suggest we send Nicole to public school if we were struggling financially, but he was wrong. We've never faced financial instability in our lives. His assumptions about our situation were unfounded. He kept interrupting and talking over me, making it impossible for us to have a civil conversation. His immature remarks pushed me to my limit. I warned him sternly, "That's enough. Don't ever speak to my daughter like that again, or there will be consequences." With that, I stormed out, leaving him speechless. After our confrontation, Nicole said he stopped bothering her altogether. I was surprised she let it go so easily, but thankfully, she made it through to graduation unscathed. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to the parent-teacher conference afterward. Nicole confidently chose to attend the same middle school as her friends, despite the teacher's mocking laughter. "I'm here with my sister for my niece's graduation," Joseph said, suddenly realizing that Nicole was his niece, and then recognizing me as his sister. It was time for me to set the record straight. My late husband was a renowned writer, and we still receive royalties from his work. We're financially secure because of that. Plus, I have my own steady income. He was stunned. "The author Kiri, whose work inspired you and whom you admired, is actually me. It's a pseudonym I used. You can imagine the royalties from that alone." My husband and I enjoyed collaborating, but I also wanted to pursue my own writing. After his passing, I shifted to a more flexible job to focus on my writing full-time. I poured my heart into my writing, and as I continued, I improved. I couldn't have stopped working altogether, but I enjoy the company and value the routine. That's how I finally completed my book. Joseph saw parallels between his upbringing and the author's story, but instead of overcoming his past, he projected his resentments onto others, including my daughter. He wrongly assumed my family was struggling and belittled us. Such behavior is unacceptable, especially from a teacher. He's not fit for the role. He didn't respond and instead broke down in tears in front of everyone. My brother reported him to the principal, leading to Joseph's swift termination. I provided the principal with recorded evidence of my confrontation with Joseph, which left my brother speechless upon hearing. He expressed disappointment in Joseph's true character and doubted Joseph's ability to continue teaching with such behavior. I realized I had misjudged him. Don't worry. People like him are rare, otherwise the world would be doomed. I hope I never become like that. My brother chuckled at Joseph's behavior. You should focus on your own happiness now. I'm content, and you don't need to worry about me. Maybe it's time for you to start dating. What about you? You could date and be even happier. As long as you're happy, I'm happy. But a new dad? My daughter is wise beyond her years. She's my happiness. Why do we feel so alone? Is it in our minds, or do we close ourselves off from seeing the beauty around us? The answer lies within our hearts.
I sat in the dim light of the study, my fingers trembling as they clutched the DVD. The label read, The Birth of Nathan, April 17th, 2023. It felt like an eternity since I had stumbled upon it, each moment stretching endlessly as I grappled with its implications. The conversation with Richard earlier that day echoed in my mind, his words cutting deep. Infertility treatment? Why bother with that? Just focus on your duties around here, he had dismissed. It was then I felt reduced to nothing more than a mere convenience in his life. As I heard the front door open, signaling Richard's return, panic and resolve warred within me. I quickly concealed the DVD under a stack of papers and braced myself. My heart pounded against my ribcage, but I couldn't let fear win. Richard, we need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave me a cursory glance, annoyance etched on his face. What now, Emily? More complaints about feeling lonely or neglected. Taking a deep breath, I confronted him. It's about us, about our family. I found something today, Richard. A DVD. I watched his demeanor shift, a fleeting look of fear replacing his annoyance. What DVD? What are you talking about? The Birth of Nathan, I said, allowing the name to linger between us. Who is Nathan, Richard? And who is Laura? His facade crumbled. Panic flickered in his eyes as he looked for an escape. It's not what you think, Emily. You're jumping to conclusions. Am I? My voice rose, a mix of anger and hurt. I watched it, Richard. I saw you there with her during the birth. You were there for her in a way you've never been for me. His silence was a deafening confirmation. My world, once so stable, was crumbling. The man I had devoted my life to was a stranger, his betrayal exposed in the cruelest of ways. The doorbell's chime broke through the tense silence. I answered it to find a man, probably in his late 20s, looking back at me with an anxious expression. Hello, can I help you? My voice was barely a whisper. The man hesitated. I'm Daniel. Is Richard here? I need to speak to him about Laura. It's urgent. A cold shiver ran down my spine at the mention of Laura's name. This was no coincidence. Please come in, I said, moving aside. I think we have a lot to discuss, Daniel. As we sat in the living room, the puzzle began to assemble itself. Daniel, Laura's ex-boyfriend, believed he might be Nathan's father, a child Richard claimed as his own. My marriage, it seemed, was built on lies and deceit. I need your help, Daniel's voice was laced with desperation. I have to know the truth about Nathan. I looked at him, feeling a newfound resolve. You'll have it. We both will. As Richard entered the room, unaware of the impending storm, one thing became crystal clear to me. My life was about to change forever. I never imagined that my life would become a twisted tale of deceit. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, my mind replayed the years spent with Richard. Our marriage, once a source of joy, now felt like a beautifully wrapped lie. I remembered our wedding day, the promise of a future filled with love and shared dreams. Richard had seemed like the perfect match, a successful businessman with a charming demeanor. But soon, the fairy tale began to unravel. Our attempts to start a family became a silent battleground. Every month brought disappointment, and with it Richard's indifference grew. I became a shadow in my own home, my presence only acknowledged when chores or errands demanded attention. The memory of my last attempt to address our childlessness resurfaced. "Richard, it's been 3 years. Maybe we should see a doctor, consider fertility treatment?" His response was a cold dismissal. "We don't need that. Just focus on your duties here." His words stung like a slap. It wasn't just about a child. It was about being partners, supporting each other. But to Richard, I was just a fixture in his pristine house, a part of the background. My thoughts were interrupted by the chime of my phone. A message from Daniel. "Can we meet tomorrow? I have something to show you." Curiosity and a sense of solidarity with Daniel compelled me to agree. The next morning, over coffee in a quiet cafe, Daniel shared his story. He and Laura had been in a serious relationship before Richard swept her off her feet. Daniel's face twisted in pain as he recounted how he had lost Laura to Richard's allure and wealth. "But I can't believe Nathan is Richard's son," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I've seen pictures of Nathan, and there's a resemblance to me at that age." His words sparked a fire within me. Richard's betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. He didn't just cheat, he stole a child's identity, a father's right. Daniel slid an envelope across the table. "I've hired a private investigator. We'll get to the bottom of this." I felt a mix of fear and determination as I took the envelope. It was time to face the ugly truth head on. And if Richard was indeed the liar and cheat he appeared to be, he would have to answer for it. Not just to me, but to everyone he had deceived. I returned home with a clear mission. I would no longer be the silent, dutiful wife. Richard's facade would crumble, and his true, repulsive nature would be exposed. And I would be the one to light the fuse. As I sat across from Richard at dinner, the silence was suffocating. Each clink of cutlery sounded like a thunderclap in the tense air. I could barely swallow my food, my thoughts consumed by the plan forming in my mind. "Richard," I finally broke the silence, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk about our future." He looked up, his eyes void of the warmth they once held. "What about it, Emily? Planning more vacations to fill your empty days?" The disdain in his voice was a sharp reminder of how far we drifted apart. "No, Richard, it's about us, about our family." I pressed on, feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. He scoffed, pushing his plate away. "What family, Emily? We don't have kids, remember? Or is this about that ridiculous DVD again?" I felt my resolve harden. "Yes, it's about the DVD, Richard. It's about Nathan, and it's about Laura." My heart pounded in my chest, but I was determined to confront him. For a moment, Richard seemed taken aback, his facade cracking. Then he regained his composure and sneered. "What do you want, Emily? An apology? An explanation? Or perhaps a share of my wealth?" His words were like venom, each syllable dripping with contempt. I stared at him, aghast at the man he'd become, or perhaps the man he'd always been. "You know what, Richard? I want the truth," I said, my voice rising. "I want to know why you brought that woman into our lives, why you lied to me, to everyone." Richard leaned back in his chair, a cold smile playing on his lips. "You want the truth, Emily? Fine. I was bored. You were always so busy playing the perfect housewife, so obsessed with having a child. Laura was different. Exciting." His confession struck me like a physical blow. He had betrayed our vows, our life together, for a mere diversion. I felt a surge of anger, hot and unyielding. "And Nathan?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Richard shrugged, his indifference a stark contrast to my turmoil. A convenient lie. Laura needed a father for her child, and I needed entertainment. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're despicable, Richard. You used a child, a woman, to satisfy your selfish needs, and you used me, your wife." Richard stood too, his eyes gleaming with malice. "And what will you do about it, Emily? Divorce me? Go ahead. You'll be left with nothing." His threat hung in the air, but it no longer frightened me. I had nothing left to lose. "I'll do more than just leave you, Richard," I said, my voice cold and resolute. "I'll expose you for the fraud you are. Everyone will know the truth about Richard the Great." As I stormed out of the room, leaving Richard in stunned silence, I knew there was no turning back. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. I met with Daniel early the next morning, the winter sun casting a pale light over the city. He greeted me with a solemn nod, his eyes reflecting a shared determination. "We need to expose Richard, Emily," Daniel said as we found a quiet corner in the bustling cafe. "I have information from the private investigator. It's not pretty." I braced myself, knowing that whatever Daniel had to say would only fuel the fire of my resolve. "Tell me everything," I urged, my voice firm. Daniel slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a timeline of Richard's deceit. It was all there in black and white. The affair with Laura, the secret payments, the lies he had woven so skillfully. "It's worse than we thought," Daniel said gravely. "Richard has been supporting Laura financially. He's been paying for her apartment, her living expenses, everything." I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Richard had not only cheated on me, but had also used our resources to sustain his illicit affair. "And Nathan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated, then spoke. "Nathan is most likely your child, Emily. Laura was already pregnant when she met Richard. He knew it and still played the doting father to the world." The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. Richard's betrayal was more profound than I could have ever imagined. He had stolen the identity of a child, my child, for his twisted game. "We have to bring this to light," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "We'll expose him at the family gathering. It's in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there." Daniel nodded in agreement. "I'll be there too. We'll confront him together." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and restless nights. I felt like a shadow in my own home, avoiding Richard's gaze, ignoring his attempts at conversation. My heart was set on one thing only: revenge. The day of the gathering arrived, a cold and clear winter day. The family home was filled with laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. As the evening wore on, I found my moment. I stood, my hands trembling slightly, and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have something to show you. Something that will change the way you see Richard." All eyes turned to me, including Richard's, which held a flicker of fear for the first time. I played the DVD, the images of Laura giving birth, Richard by her side, filling the screen. The room fell into stunned silence. "This is not just any woman," I said, my voice steady. "This is Laura, Richard's mistress. And the child? He's mine. Richard has been living a lie." The gasps and murmurs filled the room. Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. "Emily, what is this madness?" he spat out. "You're embarrassing yourself and our family." But I stood my ground. "No, Richard, the only embarrassment here is you. Your lies, your deceit, it all ends tonight." Daniel stepped forward, his presence a silent support. "She's telling the truth. I've seen the evidence. Richard has been funding Laura's life with his affair." Richard's face was a mask of fury and fear. "You'll pay for this, Emily, both of you." But it was too late. The truth was out, and Richard's world was crumbling around him. As the family erupted into chaos, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done it. I had exposed Richard for the fraud he was, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. The family gathering had turned into a battlefield, and I stood at its center, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. Richard's mask of composure had slipped, revealing the man he truly was. "You've gone too far, Emily," Richard hissed, his face twisted in anger. "You're trying to ruin me with lies." His denial only fueled my resolve. "Lies? You call this a lie?" I gestured to the screen, still displaying the image of him with Laura. "The truth is right there for everyone to see." Murmurs rippled through the room. Relatives exchanged shocked glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disgust. Richard's mother, a kind woman who had always treated me like a daughter, her voice trembled with emotion. "Richard, how could you do this? To Emily, to our family?" Richard's gaze darted around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. "Mother, it's not what it looks like. Emily is manipulating everything." But his words fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming. The family's disappointment and anger were palpable. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "There's more. Richard has been financially supporting Laura and her child, using family funds. He's been living a double life." The revelation sent another shock wave through the room. Richard's father, a stern man of few words, rose from his seat. "Is this true, Richard? Have you been stealing from your own family?" Richard's composure crumbled. "It's not stealing. I earned that money. I can do what I want with it." His selfishness was on full display, and the family recoiled from him as if he were a stranger. "You're no son of mine," his father declared, his voice echoing with finality. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I watched Richard's world fall apart. He had built his life on lies and deceit, and now he was paying the price. "Emily, I'm sorry," Richard said, turning to me with desperation in his eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. Please, let's talk about this." But it was too late for apologies. "There's nothing to discuss, Richard. I want a divorce, and I want you out of my life for good." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Richard looked around, his expression one of disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend how quickly his life had unraveled. As I left the room, followed by a stunned silence, I knew that this was just the beginning. Richard would face the consequences of his actions, and I would start a new chapter of my life, free from his lies. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind. News of Richard's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing his once respected name. I watched from a distance as the empire he built on lies crumbled around him. Richard attempted to reach out, his messages oscillating between pleading and anger. "Emily, we can fix this. Don't throw away what we have over one mistake," one message read. The next would be filled with accusations. "You've ruined me. How could you be so heartless?" But I remained resolute. His words no longer held power over me. I was done being a pawn in his twisted game. As the divorce proceedings began, Richard's true nature became even more apparent. He fought tooth and nail for every penny, his greed overshadowing any remnants of the man I once loved. "I won't let you leave me with nothing," he spat during one of our meetings. "You think you can destroy me and walk away? I'll make sure you regret this." But his threats were empty, his power waning. The evidence of his infidelity and misuse of funds had left him with little legal ground to stand on. The final blow came when his parents, once his staunchest supporters, turned their backs on him. "We can't condone what you've done, Richard. You're no longer welcome in this family," his father declared, the disappointment in his voice cutting through the tense air of the courtroom. As I walked out of the courthouse, the final divorce papers in hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from Richard, free from the web of lies that had ensnared me for so long. But my victory was bittersweet. I had loved Richard once, and watching him fall so far was not a cause for celebration. It was a sad, albeit necessary, end to a chapter of my life. As I started anew, I found strength in my newfound independence. I had faced Richard and his deceit head-on and emerged stronger. It was a testament to my resilience, a promise of a brighter future, free from the shadows of the past. The day I signed the divorce papers, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a sense of loss for what might have been. Richard, once a man I loved, had become a stranger defined by his greed and deceit. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. The process wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the past years seemed too much to bear. But with each passing day, I grew stronger, more confident in my newfound independence. One afternoon, several months after the divorce, I found myself at a small, quaint cafe. The place was a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle I had once known with Richard. It was here, amidst the simple, unpretentious surroundings, that I finally felt at peace. As I sipped my coffee, lost in thought, a familiar face caught my attention. Daniel walked in, looking around before his eyes met mine. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Emily, it's good to see you," he said, taking the seat opposite me. "Daniel, how have you been?" I asked, returning his smile. "Well, I've been busy, working on a new project, keeping myself occupied," he replied. "And you? How are you holding up?" I took a moment before answering, reflecting on the journey I had been through. "I'm doing well, actually. It's been a time of self-discovery, of healing." We talked for hours, our conversation flowing easily. Daniel shared his dreams for the future, his passion for his work. I found myself opening up about my aspirations, my hopes for a new chapter in my life. As the cafe began to empty, Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Emily, I've seen the strength and courage you've shown. You've inspired me in more ways than you can imagine." His words warmed my heart, and I felt a connection with him, a bond forged through shared adversity. "Daniel, I started, but words failed me." He squeezed my hand gently. I know, Emily, and I'm here whenever you're ready to start again, to start something new, together. I looked into his eyes, seeing the kindness and understanding that had been absent in my life for so long. In that moment, I realized that while one chapter had closed, another was waiting to be written. "Thank you, Daniel," I whispered, a sense of hope blossoming within me. "I think I'm ready to start that new chapter now." As we left the cafe together, I felt a lightness in my step, a sense of optimism about the future. Life had thrown me into the depths of despair, but I had emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. In the quiet of our kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock was a stark reminder of the routine life Ethan and I had built over the years. I, Meredith Blake, at 34, had juggled my roles as a marketing executive and a mother with what I believed was finesse. Ethan, Zoe, and I were the picture of suburban bliss, or so I thought. "Ethan, can we talk about your spending again?" I asked, my voice steady despite the frustration bubbling beneath. He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing. "Meredith, you're not going to start this again, are you? It's just a few bucks here and there." "It's every month, Ethan, and it's not just a few bucks." "I'm worried," I pressed on, trying to keep the peace. Ethan sighed, setting his phone down with a theatrical flourish. "Look, I get it. You're the one with the big job, the big paycheck, but can't a guy enjoy life a bit? It's not like we're struggling." I bit back a sharper retort, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not saying you shouldn't, but maybe focus on that promotion you mentioned. We could really plan for the future then." He chuckled, a sound that once charmed me but now felt hollow. "Always so serious, Meredith. Fine, I'll focus on the promotion. Happy?" I wasn't, but I let it slide. Again, our life continued in its usual rhythm until that fateful sunny morning. Ethan and Zoe, my heart and soul, were off for a day out, leaving me to my weekend workload. Waving them goodbye, I felt a twinge of guilt for not joining them, but pushed it aside. Work was my excuse, my shield. Then came the call that shattered everything. "Mrs. Blake?" An unfamiliar voice, somber and heavy, broke through the silence of my home office. "Yes, speaking. Is everything okay?" My heart raced, a premonition of dread settling in. "I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your husband and your daughter," the voice continued, and the world around me blurred. "What? How? Are they okay? Please tell me they're okay." Panic clawed at my throat, each breath a struggle. "Your husband sustained minor injuries. He's stable. But your daughter, she's in emergency surgery. It's serious." Emergency surgery. The words echoed in my mind, a relentless torment. I couldn't breathe, think, or move. Zoe, my vibrant, sweet Zoe, in surgery because of what? An accident? How? I stumbled through the motions, informing my boss, driving to the hospital, a numb automaton driven by a single thought: Zoe. The hospital was a blur of white walls and hushed voices. I barely registered the words of the doctors, the sympathetic glances of the nurses. All I could focus on was the door to the operating room, where my daughter fought for her life. And then my phone rang, a jarring melody in the silence of my despair. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Ethan's parents' number. "Hello." My voice was a whisper, the effort to speak monumental. "Hey, Mom," chirped a voice, bright and unburdened. Zoe's voice. Confusion reigned. "Zoe? But how? You're supposed to be in surgery?" she finished, her laughter tinkling through the line. "Nope, I'm at Grandma and Grandpa's. Dad dropped me off this morning. Didn't he tell you?" The room spun. If Zoe was safe, then who was in that operating room? "Zoe, honey, I have to go. I'll call you back, okay?" "Okay, Mom. Love you." "Love you too," I whispered, the words heavy with a confusion and relief so profound it hurt. I turned back to the hospital, to the chaos of emotions waiting within. The mystery of the girl in the operating room loomed over me, a shadow threatening the very foundation of our lives. As I stepped back into the sterile light of the hospital, I knew one thing for certain: our lives would never be the same again. As I navigated the corridors back to the operating room, the pieces of this perplexing puzzle refused to align. The revelation that Zoe was safe, miles away from this sterile environment, offered a breath of relief smothered by a new, growing dread. Who, then, was the girl lying vulnerable on the operating table? I found Ethan in a private room, his injuries seemingly minor. The sight of him, so carefree amidst the chaos, ignited a fire within me I hadn't known existed. "Ethan," I began, my voice calm but cold, "if Zoe is with your parents, who was in the car with you?" Ethan's expression faltered, the carelessness giving way to panic. It was just a friend of Zoe's. We were giving her a lift. A friend? I echoed, skepticism lacing my words. And her parents? Were they aware she was with us? He avoided my gaze, his discomfort palpable. Yes, of course. I called them. They know. The lies were too thin, too fragile. My heart raced, not just with anger, but with a sense of betrayal so deep it threatened to engulf me. Ethan, I need the truth. Now, I demanded, stepping closer. He winced, the facade crumbling. Okay, it was Hannah, Zoe's classmate. Her mom and I, we've been... The confession hung in the air, a tangible, suffocating fog. Ethan's affair, hidden beneath layers of deceit, now laid bare. But it was the casualty of this illicit connection that shook me to my core. You risked our daughter's safety, our family, for an affair? My voice was a whisper, a mix of disbelief and fury. Ethan's attempts at justification were drowned out by the roar of betrayal in my ears. I left him there, in his room of lies, the weight of his deceit pressing down on me. My next steps were mechanical, driven by a need for confirmation, for truth amidst the web of lies. The hospital staff directed me to Hannah's parents, where I was met with a scene of despair. Hannah's mother, a woman I recognized from school events but never truly knew, was a reflection of my own turmoil. I'm Meredith, Zoe's mom, I introduced myself, the words tasting bitter. Hannah, she's in surgery because of Ethan? Her voice broke, a mirror to my heart. Yes, I had no idea about any of this. I admitted, the shame of my ignorance a heavy cloak. The conversation that followed was a blur of apologies and assurances, but one thing was clear. Ethan's actions had consequences far beyond our family. The damage was done, irrevocably altering the lives of all involved. As I left the hospital that day, the clarity of my resolve crystallized with each step. Ethan's betrayal was not just a violation of our vows, but a danger to our daughter and others. This deception would not go unanswered. I needed to act, not just for my sake, but for Zoe, for Hannah, for every innocent life touched by Ethan's selfishness. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with pain and legal battles, but one thing was sure. Ethan would face the consequences of his actions. The drive home was a journey of determination. With each mile, I shed the remnants of the woman who once believed in the facade of our perfect life. In her place emerged someone stronger, fueled by a righteous anger and a fierce protectiveness over her daughter. Ethan's deception had shattered our family, but from the ruins I vowed to rebuild, stronger and wiser. The truth was my weapon, and with it, I would ensure justice was served. The following days were a whirlwind of activity, each action deliberate, aimed at uncovering the full extent of Ethan's betrayal. I moved with a clarity of purpose, fueled by the betrayal that had upended our lives. I started by securing legal counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer named Diane who specialized in family law. She listened intently as I laid out everything, from Ethan's requests for money to the accident and his affair. We'll need concrete evidence if you want to pursue this in court, Diane advised, her tone serious but not without empathy. Bank statements, communications between Ethan and the other woman, anything that can substantiate your claims. Armed with Diane's advice, I turned my attention to gathering the necessary proof. I delved into our financial records, uncovering a pattern of withdrawals and expenses that now made sickening sense. Each transaction was a breadcrumb leading back to Ethan's deceit. But it was the discovery of Ethan's old phone, discarded in a drawer, that proved to be the linchpin. Powered on, it revealed a treasure trove of messages and photos that painted a vivid picture of his infidelity. With each piece of evidence collected, my resolve hardened. Ethan had not only endangered our daughter's well-being, but had shattered the trust and safety of our family unit. His actions demanded consequences. It was during this period of meticulous planning that Ethan, oblivious to the storm brewing, attempted to reach out. Meredith, we need to talk about Zoe. And us, he pleaded over the phone, his voice laced with a desperation that once might have moved me. Us? There is no us, Ethan. Not anymore, I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the warmth he was accustomed to. But Meredith, You what, Ethan? You're sorry? I cut him off, my patience for his excuses long gone. Save it. I'm speaking to you through my lawyer from now on. The line went dead, a symbolic end to any remnants of our relationship. My next steps were clear. each action calculated to protect Zoe and ensure Ethan faced the full repercussions of his actions. I met with Diane again, armed with the evidence and a steely determination. "We file for divorce," I stated, no trace of doubt in my voice. "And I want full custody of Zoe. He's proven he can't be trusted with her safety." Diane nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll prepare the papers. We'll also go after him for child support and alimony. With this evidence, we have a strong case." As I left Diane's office, the weight of my decisions weighed heavily on me. Yet the path forward was clear. Ethan's betrayal had irrevocably altered the course of our lives, but I would do whatever it took to ensure Zoe's future was secure and happy. The battle lines were drawn, and while the road ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, I was ready. Ready to confront Ethan, to protect Zoe, and to reclaim our lives from the ruins of his deceit. The legal proceedings began with a precision that mirrored my newfound resolve. Diane filed the divorce papers, and we prepared for the initial court hearing. The evidence we gathered was damning, a silent testament to Ethan's betrayal and negligence. As the court date approached, Ethan attempted reconciliation, his messages oscillating between apologies and accusations. But I had shut the door on that chapter of our life, my focus solely on securing Zoe's future. On the day of the hearing, the courthouse loomed large, a symbol of the justice I sought. Ethan was already there, looking diminished, a far cry from the confident man I once knew. "Meredith, please, can we not do this here?" he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper as we waited outside the courtroom. "Do what, Ethan?" "Face the consequences of your actions," I replied, my gaze steady on him. "This is exactly where we need to be." He shook his head, the facade of contrition slipping as he hissed, "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a mistake." "A mistake?" The words were sharp, laced with disbelief. "You endangered our daughter, Ethan. You destroyed our family for an affair. This is the consequence of your actions, not an overreaction." Before he could respond, Diane appeared, her presence a calming force. "It's time," she said, ushering me away from Ethan and towards the courtroom. Inside, the proceedings were a blur, the judge's voice a distant echo as the reality of the situation settled over me. Diane was relentless, presenting the evidence of Ethan's affair and financial irresponsibility with clinical precision. Ethan's lawyer attempted to mitigate the damage, arguing for leniency and shared custody. But the evidence spoke louder than any of his pleas, painting a picture of a man who had not only been unfaithful, but had recklessly endangered his child. When the judge finally spoke, his words were a balm to the wounds Ethan had inflicted. "Given the evidence presented, I am granting Miss Blake full custody of Zoe. Mr. Blake will have supervised visitation rights until further notice. As for financial support, given the circumstances and Mr. Blake's actions, he will provide child support and alimony." The gavel's finality marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new, uncertain path. Ethan's face, pale and defeated, was the last I saw before turning away, Diane's reassuring presence guiding me out of the courtroom. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, as if the weight of the past months had been lifted, if only slightly. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of hope. Ethan's voice broke through the haze of my thoughts. "Meredith, wait, please." I stopped, turning to face him, the man I no longer recognized. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan. You have your consequences to face, and I have our daughter to protect." With that, I walked away, the echo of my steps a testament to the strength I had found in the face of betrayal. Ethan's attempts at reconciliation were left unanswered, a chapter firmly closed as I focused on building a future for Zoe and me, free from the shadows of his deceit. In the weeks following the court's decision, the reality of our new lives began to take shape. Ethan's fall from grace was rapid, his actions laid bare for all to see. The community, once a shared space of friendships and gatherings, became a battleground of whispers and judgment aimed at Ethan. I focused on Zoe, ensuring she felt as little of the fallout as possible. But children are perceptive, and she sensed the change, her bright demeanor shadowed by the events unfolding around her. It was during one of our afternoon walks, a time we had designated for open conversations, that Zoe's resilience shone through, her words cutting to the heart of the matter. "Mom, why is Dad not around anymore?" she asked, her innocent eyes searching mine for answers. I knelt down, taking her hands in mine, the weight of the conversation pressing down. "Honey, your dad made some choices that weren't good for us. Right now, it's important we focus on being safe and happy together." Zoe nodded, a maturity beyond her years settling over her features. "Is Dad sad?" "Yes, sweetie, he is. But it's important he understands his actions have consequences," I explained, hoping to instill in her a sense of right and wrong, shaped not by bitterness but by understanding. Zoe hugged me, her small arms a testament to the strength we had found together. "I love you, Mom. We're okay, just us two." "I love you too, Zoe." "Yes, we are," I affirmed, my heart swelling with love and determination for my daughter's future. As we continued our walk, I thought about Ethan's attempts to contact us. Each call, each message, was a plea for understanding, a plea I could not afford to heed. His actions had set this course, and the consequences were his to bear. It wasn't long before the financial repercussions of Ethan's choices became apparent. His job, once a source of pride, became untenable amidst the scandal. Child support and alimony payments began to strain his resources, a constant reminder of the responsibilities he had tried to escape. One day as I opened the mail, I found a letter from Ethan, different from the others. It was an apology, not just to me but to Zoe, an acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. I read it, the words blurring as emotions conflicted within me. It was the first step, perhaps, towards genuine remorse. But the path to forgiveness, if it was to be found, would be long and fraught with the memories of his betrayal. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Diane, documents in hand, a look of resolve on her face. "Meredith, we've got a bit more to sort through. Ethan's falling behind on the payments. It's time to enforce the court's decision," she stated, her voice firm. I nodded, the reality of our situation settling in. "Let's do what we need to, Diane. For Zoe." As Diane outlined the next steps, I realized this was but another chapter in the long road ahead. Ethan's downfall, brought on by his own actions, was a cautionary tale, one I hoped Zoe would learn from, but never have to experience firsthand. Our journey was far from over, but with each step I felt the resilience and love between Zoe and me growing stronger, a beacon guiding us through the aftermath of Ethan's choices. In the aftermath of our legal victories, life began to settle into a new rhythm, one where the absence of Ethan's presence became the norm rather than the exception. Zoe adapted with a resilience that amazed me, her laughter returning to fill the spaces of our home that had once been shadowed by conflict. It was during one of our weekend retreats, a small cabin by the lake where we'd found solace in the simplicity of nature, that Zoe broached the subject of her father once more. "Mom, do you think Dad is okay?" she asked one evening, the sunset casting golden hues across the water. I paused, considering her question. "I think your dad has a lot of things to figure out, Zoe, but we've got each other, and that's what matters." Zoe nodded, a wisdom in her acceptance. "I just wish he understood how much he hurt us," she said softly. Her words echoed my own sentiments, a reflection of the journey we'd embarked upon. "Me too, sweetheart, but we're moving forward, and that's what counts." Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of my phone ringing, a call from Diane that I had been anticipating. I stepped away, answering with a quiet hello. "Meredith, it's Diane. I have news. Ethan's been held accountable for the missed payments. The court's enforced a lien on his assets. It's a significant step towards ensuring Zoe's future is secure," she informed me, her voice steady and reassuring. A wave of relief washed over me, tempered by the knowledge of what this meant for Ethan. "Thank you, Diane. This is good news. For Zoe," I replied, my thoughts on my daughter, who watched me from a distance. Returning to Zoe, I shared the news in terms we had come to understand, a language of moving forward and healing. "Zoe, we're going to be okay. We've got a bit more security now, thanks to the court's decision." Zoe smiled, her understanding clear. "I know, Mom. I'm glad, but I'm okay as long as I have you." The weekend passed in a blend of conversations and quiet moments, each reinforcing the bond between us, a testament to the strength we'd found in the face of adversity. Back home, the reality of our situation continued to unfold, but with each passing day, the shadows of Ethan's choices grew fainter, replaced by the light of our resilience and determination to build a life defined not by what we had lost, but by what we had gained. Zoe's progress at school, my advancements at work, and the support of friends and family painted a picture of a future bright with possibility. Ethan, for all the turmoil he had caused, became a footnote in our story, a reminder of the challenges we had overcome. As I tucked Zoe into bed one night, her words filled me with a sense of hope and purpose. "Mom, we're like a team, right? Against the world?" I smiled, kissing her forehead. "Yes, Zoe, against the world and winning." Our journey was a testament to the power of love and resilience, a narrative shaped not by the betrayal we had endured, but by the strength we had discovered within ourselves. Ethan's downfall was his own making, a path chosen through deceit and disregard. But for Zoe and me, the path we walked was one of healing, of justice, and ultimately of triumph. The end of our story was not an end at all, but a beginning, a new chapter filled with the promise of joy, growth, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. In the lush heart of an upscale neighborhood stood the property that could change my life. The price tag alone, $1.5 million, screamed luxury, but as I walked through its opulent hallways beside my husband Nathan, a sense of unease gnawed at me. "Meredith, look at this place." Nathan's eyes sparkled with an almost childlike glee. "Imagine us here, hosting parties, living the dream." I tried to mirror his enthusiasm, but a voice inside me whispered caution. "It's stunning, Nathan, but the price. Can we really manage this, even with Dad's help?" Nathan laughed, his voice echoing in the grand foyer. "Your dad won't mind. He's got more than enough. This is our chance, Meredith. Our future." His words felt like a mask slipping, revealing a glimmer of greed I hadn't seen before. We continued the tour in silence until we reached the garden. The real estate agent, a sharply dressed man named Mr. Collins, excused himself to take a call. "Go on out, Nathan. I'll catch up," I said, needing a moment alone. Nathan nodded and stepped outside. That's when Mr. Collins returned, his face unusually somber. "Mrs. Thompson, I need a word, in private," his tone urgent. Puzzled, I followed him into a small study. He closed the door with a definitive click and turned to face me. "Mrs. Thompson, what I'm about to say must stay between us. Your husband, Nathan, he's involved in something illegal." My heart skipped a beat. "What? That's impossible. Nathan's a good man." Mr. Collins sighed, his eyes holding a gravity I hadn't noticed before. "I have friends in law enforcement. They've been tracking a drug ring and Nathan's name came up. I can't divulge more, but you should know." I felt my world tilt. Nathan involved in drugs? It couldn't be. Yet. Hadn't I sensed something off? "You need to leave him, Mrs. Thompson, for your safety," Mr. Collins added. A bitter laugh escaped me. "You expect me to end my marriage based on this?" Mr. Collins's gaze was steady. "I understand this is hard to accept. Just be careful. Consider what I've said." I left the room in a daze, the lavish walls of the house now feeling like a gilded cage. Outside, Nathan was admiring the garden, oblivious to the storm raging in my mind. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Yeah, just a bit overwhelmed by all this," I lied, forcing a smile. As we drove home, Nathan chattered about the house, our future, his dreams, but my thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and fear. Was the man I married not who I thought he was? The words of Mr. Collins echoed in my mind, a sinister undercurrent to Nathan's enthusiastic plans. That night, as Nathan slept beside me, his face peaceful in the moonlight, I made a decision. I needed the truth. And if Nathan was the man Mr. Collins claimed he was, then I would make him pay. For my heart, for my trust, for everything. Revenge, a word I never thought would belong to me, settled in my heart. Nathan had chosen his path. Now it was time to choose mine. Months before the property viewing, life with Nathan seemed almost idyllic. We were the couple our friends envied, always laughing, always together. But as I lay awake that night, the past replayed in my mind, revealing cracks I had chosen to ignore. "Meredith, I'll be out late tonight." "Drinks with the guys," Nathan had said one evening, his tone casual. I remembered nodding, a smile fixed on my face. "Sure, have fun. Just don't stay out too late." As I thought back, I realized these late nights had become more frequent. Nathan, once eager to spend every moment with me, now seemed to find any excuse to be away. I had dismissed it as pre-marriage jitters, the last hurrahs of bachelorhood. But now, doubt crept in like a shadow. The following morning, I decided to confront Nathan. Over breakfast, I broached the subject. "Nathan, we need to talk. You've been out a lot lately? Is everything okay?" He looked up from his coffee, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "It's nothing, Meredith. Just enjoying my freedom while I can. You know, before the ball and chain." His words stung, and I pushed back my chair, standing up. "Is that how you see our marriage? A ball and chain?" Nathan's expression softened, and he reached for my hand. "I didn't mean it like that, Meredith. I love you. I'm just getting it all out of my system." I wanted to believe him, to return to the blissful ignorance I had basked in. But the seed of doubt Mr. Collins planted refused to be ignored. That afternoon, I called my best friend Lisa, seeking a sounding board. "Lisa, do you think I'm overreacting? Nathan's been so distant lately." Lisa's voice was hesitant. "Meredith, you know I love you both, but I've seen Nathan out. He's not always with the guys." Her words were a punch to my gut. "What do you mean?" "He's been seen around town with some unsavory characters." I didn't want to say anything, but I felt a chill run down my spine. Nathan's late nights, his evasive answers, and now Mr. Collins's warning, it all began to form a sinister picture. Over the next few days, I observed Nathan. His phone, once left carelessly around the house, was now always on him, buzzing with constant messages. His once warm demeanor towards me cooled, replaced by a detached politeness. One evening, as Nathan prepared for another night out, I confronted him again. "Nathan, who are you meeting tonight? You're always so secretive." He paused, his back to me. "Just some old friends. You wouldn't know them." The lie was evident, and I felt a surge of anger. "Nathan, I'm your wife. If there's something going on, you can tell me." He turned, his eyes hard. "There's nothing to tell, Meredith. Just drop it." As he left, slamming the door behind him, I felt a resolve harden within me. Nathan was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. No more excuses, no more lies. I was done playing the dutiful, oblivious wife. That night, as I sat alone in our cold, silent house, I knew one thing for certain. The man I married was a stranger, and I was going to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The ensuing days felt like walking through a thick fog. Each smile Nathan flashed, every affectionate gesture now seemed tainted with duplicity. I watched him, the man I had pledged my life to, with a skeptic's eye, searching for the truth behind his mask. One evening, as we sat in our living room surrounded by real estate brochures, Nathan's true nature began to emerge more clearly. "Meredith, look at this one," he said, pointing to a brochure featuring a mansion that screamed opulence. "Your dad won't mind footing the bill for this, right?" I felt a pang of disgust at his casual expectation of my father's wealth. "Nathan, we need to be realistic. We can't exploit my father's generosity." He laughed, a sound that once warmed my heart, now chilling it. "Come on, Meredith. Your dad's loaded. He'd want his little girl to live in luxury." I stared at him, the man I thought I knew, now a stranger driven by greed. "My father's money isn't a ticket to your lavish fantasies, Nathan." His face darkened, and for a moment I saw the man Mr. Collins had warned me about. "So what? You're choosing your dad over me?" I stood up, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "This isn't about choosing sides. It's about respect and responsibility, something you seem to have forgotten." Nathan stood as well, his eyes flashing with something akin to fury. "You know what, Meredith? Maybe you're the one who's forgotten what this marriage is about." I felt a cold resolve settle over me. "And what is that, Nathan? Using me for my father's money?" He didn't respond, turning away with a dismissive wave of his hand. That night, I lay in bed, the space between us wider than the physical distance. My mind was made up. I needed to protect myself and my family from this man who had become an embodiment of betrayal. The following day, I made a call to a private investigator. If Nathan wouldn't give me the truth, I would find it myself. I recounted Nathan's late nights, his sudden interest in expensive properties, and Mr. Collins's alarming revelation. "I need to know what he's hiding," I told the investigator. "I need evidence." As I set the plan in motion, a part of me mourned the loss of the love I once felt, but that grief was overshadowed by a burning desire for justice. Nathan had made his choice, and now I was making mine. Weeks passed, and the investigator provided me with updates. Nathan's business meetings were nothing more than rendezvous with known criminals. The late nights were not spent with friends, but in shady dealings. Each report was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I confronted Nathan one last time, armed with the evidence. "I know about your dealings, Nathan. I know about the people you've been meeting." His reaction was not of remorse, but of rage. "You had me followed? You spied on me?" "Yes, because you left me no choice," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I trusted you, Nathan, and you betrayed me." He scoffed, turning away. "You're just like everyone else. You don't understand what it takes to make it in this world." As he left the room, I knew there was no turning back. I had seen the real Nathan, a man consumed by greed and deceit, and I would not let him destroy me. I would fight back with every resource at my disposal. Nathan would learn that betrayal comes at a price, and I would be the one to collect it. The day of the property viewing loomed like a dark cloud. I knew it was more than just looking at houses. It was a confrontation with the truth about Nathan. As we drove in silence, my mind raced with the reports from the private investigator and the images of Nathan's secret life. The man next to me was a stranger, his charming facade now a grotesque mask. Upon arriving, the property's grandeur was overshadowed by the weight of my impending revelation. Nathan seemed oblivious, lost in visions of a life built on lies and deceit. The real estate agent, Mr. Collins, greeted us with a professionalism that felt cold. His eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As we toured the lavish rooms, Nathan's excitement was palpable. "Imagine the parties we could have here, Meredith. This is the life we deserve." His words echoed hollowly in my ears. "Deserve? Based on what, Nathan? Your lies? Your illegal activities?" He stopped, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" "I know everything, Nathan. The late nights, the criminals, the drugs. You've been living a double life." His facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the man he truly was. "You've been snooping around, spying on me?" "Yes, because I needed to know the truth," I said, my voice unwavering. Nathan's expression hardened. "You think you're better than me, Meredith? You think you're above it all with your perfect life and your rich daddy?" The accusation stung, but I stood my ground. "This isn't about me, Nathan. This is about you and the choices you've made." He scoffed, turning away. "You don't understand anything." As he stormed off, Mr. Collins approached me, his expression grave. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Mrs. Thompson, but you needed to know the truth." I nodded. My resolve strengthened. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I needed to see it for myself." Leaving the property, I knew what I had to do. Nathan's betrayal couldn't go unpunished. The man I loved was gone, replaced by a criminal who used me as a stepping stone for his ambitions. That evening, I sat alone in our now tainted home, planning my next move. Nathan's world would come crashing down, and I would be the one to pull the lever. He would pay for his deceit, not just legally, but personally. I would ensure that his fall from grace was as steep as the pedestal he had placed himself upon. The game had changed, and I was no longer a pawn in Nathan's twisted world. I was now the player, and it was my turn to make a move. The next few days were a blur of cold determination. My plan for retribution against Nathan took shape, each step meticulously crafted. I reached out to Mr. Collins, seeking more information and solidifying my resolve. We met in a discreet cafe, the buzz of the city a stark contrast to our somber conversation. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Collins began, his voice low, "I've gathered more evidence. It's worse than we thought." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos and documents, undeniable proof of Nathan's entanglement in criminal activities. My hands trembled as I leafed through the evidence. How could he be so reckless? "It's greed, Mrs. Thompson. It blinds people," Mr. Collins replied. I looked up, my eyes burning with a mix of fury and sorrow. "I want to bring him down. He can't get away with this." Collins nodded. "I understand. You have my full support." The following day, I confronted Nathan. He returned home, his usual arrogance on display. I was waiting, the folder of evidence in hand. "Nathan, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He smirked, unaware of the storm about to break. "What now, Meredith? More accusations?" I threw the folder on the table. "No, not accusations. Proof." His smirk vanished as he flipped through the documents. "Where did you get this? That's not important. What matters is that your lies are over," I said. Nathan's face contorted with rage. "You think you can corner me like this? You're nothing without me, Meredith." His words were like venom, but I stood unshaken. I was everything before you, and I'll be everything after you're gone. Your time is up, Nathan. He lunged at me, but I was ready. Stepping aside, I let his momentum carry him forward, crashing into the furniture. Stay away from me, I warned, my heart pounding. Nathan picked himself up, his eyes wild. You'll pay for this, Meredith. You think you've won? This is far from over. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew his world was crumbling. I'm going to the authorities, I declared. You're going to face the consequences of your actions. As he stormed out, I knew the battle was just beginning. But I was prepared. Nathan had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. My heart ached with the betrayal and loss, but it was overshadowed by a burning desire for justice. Nathan's fall from grace would be a spectacle, and I would be the architect of his demise. This was more than revenge. It was retribution for every lie, every deceitful smile, every moment he thought he could use me and walk away unscathed. The game of deception was over, and I was writing the final act. Nathan would learn that betrayal comes with a price, and I was here to collect. The day of reckoning arrived with a heavy air. I stood in the living room, the evidence of Nathan's betrayal neatly compiled on the coffee table, waiting for him to return. My heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. Today, Nathan's charade would end. The sound of the door opening sent a shiver down my spine. Nathan walked in, his usual confident stride faltering as he saw the determined look in my eyes. "Meredith, what's this about?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. "It's about the truth, Nathan," I replied, my voice unwavering. "The truth about who you really are." He scoffed, attempting to deflect. "You're being dramatic. Let's just talk this out." I pushed the folder towards him. "Talk? Like how you talked your way into illegal dealings? Or how you talked about love while betraying everything we stood for?" Nathan's facade began to crumble, his eyes betraying a flicker of panic. "Meredith, you don't understand. I did this for us, for our future." "By destroying it?" I countered sharply. "You did this for yourself, Nathan. Your greed, your lies, you've ruined everything." He lunged towards me, his face contorted with rage. "You think you can judge me? You, with your perfect life and your daddy's money?" I stepped back, my resolve hardening. "This isn't about me, Nathan. It's about your crimes, your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences." Nathan's anger turned to desperation. "Meredith, please. We can fix this. I can fix this." But it was too late. "There's nothing left to fix, Nathan. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." With a trembling hand, I dialed the number I had prepared. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, and police officers arrived at our door. Nathan's face drained of color as he realized the gravity of the situation. "You called the police?" "Yes, Nathan. It's over," I said, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over me. As the officers handcuffed him, Nathan turned to me, his eyes filled with a toxic combination of anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Meredith. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." But I stood firm, watching as he was led away. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose deceit and greed had consumed him. In the silence that followed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done what was necessary, not just for me, but for the justice that Nathan had so callously disregarded. The path ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. Nathan's betrayal had shattered my trust, but it had also revealed a strength in me I never knew I had. As I looked around the empty house, I realized that this was not an end but a beginning of a new chapter, one where I was no longer a victim of deceit but a survivor, ready to rebuild my life on my own terms. The days following Nathan's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and legal proceedings. Sitting in the courtroom, watching the man I once loved now reduced to a criminal defendant, I felt a complex mix of triumph and heartache. As the judge delivered the verdict, guilty on multiple counts, Nathan's face was a mask of defeat. He turned to look at me, his eyes a mix of anger and despair. In that moment, I saw the remnants of the man I had married, buried under layers of greed and deception. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed, eager for a statement. I faced them, my voice steady. "Justice has been served today. It's a sad day when someone you trusted betrays not just you, but the law." The following weeks were a time of reflection. I realized that my marriage to Nathan had been built on a foundation of lies. but I also recognized the strength and resilience I had found within myself. I decided to start anew, leaving behind the tainted memories of our shared home. Selling the property, I moved into a smaller, cozier place, one that represented my new beginning. One day, while settling into my new life, I received a call. It was Nathan's parents. They wanted to meet, to apologize for their son's actions. We met at a quiet cafe, and the remorse in their eyes was genuine. "Meredith, we're so sorry for what Nathan did to you," his mother said, her voice quivering. I nodded, acknowledging their pain. "Thank you, but Nathan's choices were his own. You don't need to bear his guilt." His father, a stoic man, handed me an envelope. "We know it can't undo the harm, but please accept this as a token of our apology." I opened the envelope to find a substantial check. I hesitated, then pushed it back. "I appreciate the gesture, but I cannot accept this. Nathan's actions are not your responsibility." Their gratitude was evident, and we parted ways with a mutual understanding and respect. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. The experience with Nathan had changed me, but it had also opened my eyes to my own strength and the importance of trust and integrity. One day, I received news that Nathan had been released on parole. A part of me tensed at the thought of facing him again, but I realized that he no longer had power over me. I had moved on, leaving the shadows of our past behind. I learned that Nathan had started working, trying to rebuild his life. Whether he had truly changed, I didn't know, but it was no longer my concern. My journey had taught me that some people come into our lives as lessons, and Nathan had been my harshest one. As I walked through the park, the sun setting in a brilliant array of colors, I felt a sense of peace. The chapter of my life with Nathan was closed, but my story was far from over. In the end, I had not just survived, I had thrived. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them with a heart that was stronger, wiser, and more open than ever before. I stood in the doorway of our new home, the home that Richard and I had dreamt of for years. My heart swelled with pride at the thought of the life we were about to start here. The house was still echoing with the sounds of emptiness, waiting to be filled with our laughter and memories. But that dream was about to be shattered in a way I never could have imagined. As I unpacked a box in the kitchen, I heard the doorbell ring. "I'll get it," I called out, wiping my hands on my apron. I opened the door expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a delivery person. Instead, there stood a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with a confident air about her. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked, puzzled. Before she could answer, Richard appeared behind me. "Ah, you're here. Come in, Isabella," he said cheerfully, brushing past me to welcome her inside. Confused, I followed them into the living room. "Richard, who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emma, meet Isabella. She's my girlfriend," he said, as casually as if he were talking about the weather. I felt the ground beneath me shift. "You're what?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. Isabella looked around the house, commenting on everything with an ease that made my stomach churn. "It's a lovely house. The kitchen is so spacious, and oh, look at those big windows." Richard beamed at her. "I'm glad you like it. Emma, isn't it great that Isabella approves of our new home?" I stood there, frozen, as the weight of his words sank in. This was not a misunderstanding or a bad joke. My husband, the man I had trusted and loved for a decade, was openly admitting to an affair in our own home. "But the house, it was for us," I stammered, my mind racing. Richard shrugged. "Things change, Emma. I've found someone who truly understands me." Isabella laughed, a light, carefree sound that felt like a slap in my face. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Emma. It's just life, you know." Their words cut through me, but they also ignited a fire within me. I wasn't going to be the victim in this cruel play of fate. "You think you can just replace me? In my own house?" I said, my voice gaining strength. Richard looked at me, his expression cold. "It's not just your house anymore, Emma. It's ours." I knew then that this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a battle for my dignity, my home, and my future. A battle I was determined to win. Leaving Richard and Isabella in the living room, I retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom, the walls of which seemed to mock me with their newly painted cheerfulness. As I sat on the edge of our bed, now just a piece of furniture in a house that no longer felt like mine, The reality of Richard's betrayal sank in. Tears streamed down my face, not just for a lost marriage, but for the life I thought I had. The next few hours were a blur. I packed a suitcase with mechanical movements, my mind numbed by shock. Each item I placed inside felt like a piece of my heart being torn away. I couldn't bear to stay in the house a moment longer. Arriving at my parents' house was like stepping into a different world. The familiar warmth and comfort contrasted sharply with the cold betrayal I had just left behind. My mother opened the door, her face lighting up with joy, which quickly turned to concern when she saw the suitcase and my tear-streaked face. "Emma, what happened? Why are you here with your suitcase?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The dam of emotions I had been holding back broke, and I collapsed into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. She led me inside, her presence a soothing balm to my shattered soul. It wasn't until much later, when my sobs had subsided into sniffles, that I managed to recount the day's events. I told her about Isabella, about Richard's betrayal, and the painful realization that my marriage was a lie. My mother listened in silence, her eyes reflecting the storm of emotions I felt. Anger, sorrow, disbelief, they all flickered across her face as she processed what I had said. "When did it start, Emma? Did you have any suspicions?" she finally asked. I shook my head, feeling a fresh wave of pain. "I don't know, Mom. I thought we were happy. I was so blind." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not blind, Emma. You trusted the man you loved. There's no shame in that." Her words were a small comfort, but they couldn't quell the storm raging inside me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and above all furious. The image of Richard and Isabella laughing and planning their future in the house that was supposed to be ours filled me with a burning desire for revenge. "What are you going to do, Emma? Are you going to let them get away with this?" my mother asked, her voice firm. I looked up, meeting her eyes. In them, I saw a reflection of the determination growing within me. "No, Mom. I won't let them get away with this. Richard and his lover will pay for what they've done." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations and late-night strategy sessions with my mother. We pored over property laws and divorce statutes, seeking loopholes and strategies to turn the tables on Richard. My mother, once a paralegal, became my ally in this battle of wits and law. I returned to the house unannounced, my resolve as solid as the walls around me. Richard and Isabella were in the living room, their laughter echoing through the hallway. They froze as I stepped in, their expressions a mix of surprise and irritation. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Richard asked, his tone dismissive. "I came to talk about the house and our divorce," I said firmly, my eyes never leaving his. Isabella scoffed. "Still hung up on that, are you? Move on, Emma." Ignoring her, I focused on Richard. "This house is in my name. Legally, you have no claim to it." Richard's face hardened. "We built this house together, Emma. I have every right to it." "But legally, you don't," I countered, feeling a surge of confidence. "And as for the divorce, I'll make sure it reflects your infidelity." Isabella laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. "You think you can intimidate us with legal threats? Grow up, Emma." Richard stood up, his posture tense. "You're out of your depth here. Just sign the divorce papers and leave us be." I smiled, a cold, calculated expression. "I'm not here to make your life easier, Richard. I'm here to claim what's rightfully mine, and if you think I'll walk away quietly, you're sorely mistaken." The look of shock on Richard's face was satisfying, but it was just the beginning. I knew this was a long battle ahead, and I was ready for it. As I turned to leave, I looked back at them, their faces a picture of disbelief and annoyance. "This is my house, and I will fight for it. And Richard, you'll regret the day you decided to betray me," I said, my voice steady and strong. As I walked out of the house, I felt a sense of power I had never experienced before. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the architect of their downfall, and I would make sure Richard and Isabella paid dearly for their betrayal. Armed with legal advice and a newfound determination, I began to dismantle Richard's life piece by piece. My first move was to freeze our joint accounts, cutting off the financial lifeline he had been so comfortably relying on. I watched, almost detached, as Richard's facade of control began to crumble. A few days later, I received a call from him, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "Emma, What the hell do you think you're doing? You've frozen our accounts. That's right, Richard. You seem to forget that half of that money is mine, I replied, my voice calm and steady. You can't just cut me off like this. We need to discuss this, he demanded. Discuss? Like how you discussed your affair with me? I don't think so, I retorted. Richard's voice grew louder, more frantic. You're ruining everything. This is petty and childish. I could almost see him pacing, his world spinning out of control. Petty? Childish? No, Richard. This is me taking control. You made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. I hung up, feeling a rush of adrenaline. For years I had played the part of the supportive, unsuspecting wife. But those days were over. Next, I turned my attention to the house. I consulted with a lawyer and initiated proceedings to evict Richard and Isabella. The legal documents were delivered to them, and I savored the sweet taste of vengeance. Richard called again, this time his voice laced with a hint of fear. You're evicting us? You can't be serious, Emma. Oh, but I am. This house is in my name, and I don't recall inviting you and your girlfriend to stay, I said. You can't just throw us out on the street, he protested. Watch me, I replied coldly. The days that followed were a testament to my resolve. Richard tried to negotiate, to bargain, to plead, but I was unmoved. My heart had turned to stone against the man who had betrayed me so callously. The day of the eviction arrived, and I stood outside the house as Richard and Isabella left, their belongings in tow. Isabella shot me a venomous look, but I met it with a triumphant smile. Enjoy your new life, Richard. You've earned it, I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. As they drove away, I stepped into the house, now empty of their presence. It was a hollow victory, but a victory nonetheless. I had taken back control of my life, and it was just the beginning. Richard and Isabella had underestimated me, and they were now paying the price. With Richard and Isabella out of the house, I focused on the next phase of my plan. I started by changing the locks and installing a new security system, erasing every trace of Richard from what was once our shared space. The house, which had been a symbol of our life together, was now solely under my control. My lawyer and I then began the process of negotiating the divorce settlement. I insisted on a meeting with Richard, wanting to see the impact of my actions face to face. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, composed and ready. Richard walked in, a shadow of his former confident self. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by bitterness and resentment. Emma, let's be reasonable about this, he started, his voice strained. Reasonable? Like how you were reasonable when you brought your lover into our home. I countered sharply. He shifted uncomfortably. That was a mistake, I know, but we can still settle this amicably. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. Amicable is off the table, Richard. You lost that option when you decided to betray me. The negotiations were tense, with Richard trying to salvage whatever he could. But I was unyielding. In the end, we reached a settlement heavily in my favor. Richard would have to liquidate most of his assets to meet the terms. As he signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. After the meeting, I received a call from Isabella. Her voice was high-pitched and frantic. Emma, you can't do this to us. You're destroying our lives, she cried. I replied coldly. Your comfort was never my concern, Isabella. You and Richard made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. But we have nothing now. How could you be so heartless, she wailed. Heartless? You expect sympathy from me? I'm giving you exactly what you deserve, I said, hanging up the phone. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Richard's life unraveled. His financial woes, compounded by the divorce settlement, left him struggling to keep afloat. Isabella, once so confident and carefree, became a frequent figure in heated arguments outside my lawyer's office. I had taken back control, not just of my home, but of my life. Richard and Isabella were now mere players in a game they had no hope of winning. The tides had turned, and I was the one setting the course. The months following the divorce were a testament to the change in our fortunes. I rebuilt my life, slowly filling the empty spaces in the house with new memories, while Richard's world seemed to crumble around him. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Richard. He looked disheveled, a far cry from the confident man he once was. His eyes had a desperate look as he stood on my doorstep. "Emma, please, we need to talk," he pleaded. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "What is there to talk about, Richard?" "It's about the settlement. I can't afford it. I'm drowning in debt," he said, his voice breaking. I felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of his betrayal. "That's not my problem, Richard. You should have thought about that before." He took a step closer, desperation etching his features. "I was wrong, Emma. I know that now. But this is too much. I can't survive like this." I looked at him, the man who had once meant the world to me, now reduced to a shell of his former self. "Survive? Like I had to when you shattered my world? You're just tasting a bit of your own medicine, Richard." Richard's face twisted in a mix of anger and sorrow. "Is this what you wanted, Emma? To see me destroyed?" "This is what justice looks like, Richard. You made your choices, and now you're living with the consequences," I replied. He stared at me, the realization dawning on him that there was no sympathy to be found here. With a defeated look, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped. As I closed the door, I realized that the satisfaction I had expected to feel was muted. Watching Richard's downfall was a hollow victory. It didn't bring back the years of trust and love that had been lost, nor did it erase the pain of betrayal, but it was a necessary closure. I had stood up for myself, fought back against injustice, and reclaimed my life. It was time to move on, to leave the past and its pain behind. In the quiet of my home, I knew that the battle was over. I had won, not just against Richard, but against the helplessness that had once threatened to engulf me. It was a victory, not of revenge, but of resilience and renewal. The final act of my retribution came unexpectedly. Richard, now a shadow of his former self, reached out to me again, but this time it was different. He needed my help. We met at a coffee shop, a neutral ground far from the memories of our shared past. Richard was late, and when he arrived, he looked more haggard than ever. "Emma, I'm in trouble," as he said without preamble, his voice laden with a fatigue I hadn't heard before. I raised an eyebrow, sipping my coffee. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" It's Isabella. She's pregnant," he confessed, avoiding my gaze. The news didn't surprise me as much as his reaction to it. "And how is that my problem, Richard?" He swallowed hard, the lines on his face deepening. "It's not just that she's pregnant. She's demanding money, a lot of it. She says if I don't pay, she'll make sure I never see the child." I listened, my expression unreadable. "So the woman you left me for is now blackmailing you? How poetic." Richard's eyes met mine, a flicker of the man he used to be shining through his desperation. "I don't know what to do, Emma. I've lost everything. I can't afford to lose my child, too." There was a time when his plea would have tugged at my heartstrings, but that time was long gone. "You expect sympathy from me, after everything you've done?" "No, not sympathy. Help. I need your help, Emma," he said, the words seeming to cost him his last shred of pride. I considered his request, the irony of the situation not lost on me. Richard, once so sure of himself and his decisions, was now at my mercy. But I wasn't the same woman he had left. His problems were no longer mine to bear. "I can't help you, Richard. This is the life you chose. You have to deal with the consequences, just like I did," I said, my voice firm. Richard looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as he realized that there was no help to be found here. He nodded slowly, a resigned acceptance in his eyes. As he left, I watched him go, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. This was the end of our story, a story that had started with love and ended with betrayal and retribution. I sat there for a long time, lost in thought. My journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartache, but it had also been empowering. I had found strength I never knew I had, and I had come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient. Richard's downfall was a stark reminder of the consequences of betrayal, but it was also a reminder that I was no longer defined by his actions. I was my own person, free from the shadows of the past. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that was Richard was finally closed, and a new chapter was waiting to be written. A chapter filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a new beginning. As months turned into seasons, I found myself embarking on a journey of self-discovery and rebuilding. The house, once a symbol of shared dreams with Richard, gradually transformed into a sanctuary of my personal triumph and newfound independence. One evening, as I sat in the living room surrounded by the new decor that reflected my tastes, the doorbell rang. Hesitantly, I opened the door to find Isabella standing there. Her appearance drastically changed. Gone was the confident, carefree woman. In her place stood someone who looked defeated and weary. "Emma, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice lacking its former haughtiness. I was taken aback but composed myself quickly. "What do you want, Isabella?" She took a deep breath, her eyes not meeting mine. "I made a mistake, a big mistake. Richard's left me, and I'm alone with a baby on the way. I have nowhere to go." The irony of her standing on my doorstep, seeking help, was not lost on me. "And you think I'm the person to help you? After everything?" Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm desperate. I've lost everything." I looked at her, seeing in her the reflection of the pain and betrayal I had once felt. But where Richard had ignited a fire of retribution in me, Isabella's plight stirred a different emotion. "Isabella, the choices we make define us. You made your choice when you got involved with a married man," I said, my voice steady. She nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I know, and I'm paying for that choice now. I didn't know where else to go." I sighed, feeling a sense of closure and compassion that surprised me. "I can't change the past, Isabella, nor can I forget it, but I believe in second chances. I'll help you, but not because of Richard or our past. I'm doing this for your child, who shouldn't suffer for our mistakes." Isabella looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Emma. I don't know how to repay you." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything. Consider this a new start for both of us." As she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Helping Isabella was the final step in letting go of the bitterness and pain. It was a gesture not of forgiveness, but of release. Standing in my home, I realized that I had not only survived the storm, but emerged stronger. I had faced betrayal, fought for justice, and found a way to move forward with grace and dignity. I walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter, and I felt a sense of peace. The chapter of revenge had closed, and a new chapter of hope and resilience had begun. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, I was ready for it. I had reclaimed my life, my home, and my identity. And with that knowledge, I stepped into the future, unburdened and free. "Evelyn, where are you? Why is our house just gone?" Ethan's voice, laced with panic, was music to my ears. I savored the moment, the sweet retribution for his betrayal. "Yes, Ethan, I had it demolished. Everything you left behind is gone." "But why?" His disbelief was palpable. "Because, Ethan, some things are too broken to be fixed," I replied, a cold calmness in my voice. "I am Evelyn, a 45-year-old caregiver, married to Ethan, a 46-year-old marketing executive. Our son, Lucas, had just moved out after college, leaving an echo in our home and apparently in Ethan's sense of responsibility. The day Lucas left, Ethan chuckled, "Evelyn, he's not a kid anymore. Let him make his own mistakes." I remember feeling a twinge of annoyance, masked by the relief of seeing them both smile. But that annoyance, that small crack, was about to widen into a chasm. Just as I thought we'd rediscover each other, life took a sharp turn. Dad fell in the yard. Broken bone, maybe. "I'm heading to the hospital," Ethan informed me one evening, his voice oddly detached. "Should I come with you?" "No, I got this. Don't worry." But worry I did. At work, I was distracted, feeling an impending sense of doom. Returning home, I found Ethan lounging on the couch, as if his father's fracture was just another minor inconvenience. "He'll need a cane," Ethan said casually, as if discussing the weather. This wasn't just about a cane. This was about Henry, Ethan's father, who had been living alone since his wife passed away 3 years ago. Despite our offers, he had refused to move in with us, valuing his independence. Now the decision was made for him. "We should live with your dad, right?" I asked Ethan, already knowing his answer. "Sure, why not?" He's family. The family home, where Ethan grew up, was more suitable for Henry in his condition. It was settled. We would move in with Henry. Little did I know, this decision was the first step towards an irreversible change, a change that would shatter the very foundations of our life together. That evening, as I looked around our soon-to-be-left condo, memories of Lucas's childhood flooded my mind. There was a bittersweet tang in the air, a mix of nostalgia and foreboding. Ethan's indifference was like a growing shadow in our home, but I was too preoccupied with the logistics of the move to confront it. In my heart, I hoped this move would bring us closer, not just to Henry, but to each other. How wrong I was. The move happened faster than expected. Henry, frail but smiling, welcomed us. "Sorry to be a burden," he said, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of memories held within the walls of his home. "You're not a burden, Dad. You're family," I assured him, while Ethan just nodded, his mind seemingly elsewhere. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever, lost in thoughts I could not reach. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey that would lead me to the ultimate act of defiance. Little did Ethan know, his world, our world, was about to come crashing down. The walls of Henry's house, steeped in history, were now silent witnesses to a growing rift. As days turned to weeks, Ethan's late returns from work became the norm. His once warm smiles were replaced by a cold, distant demeanor. "Evelyn, he's my father. I know how to handle him," Ethan snapped one evening when I expressed my concern about his lack of involvement with Henry. I bit my tongue, the bitterness of his words stinging me. It wasn't just about Henry. It was about us, about what we were becoming, or rather what we were losing. Julia, Ethan's sister, visited one weekend. Her concern was palpable as she watched us moving around each other like distant planets in a decaying orbit. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" "Living with Dad, I mean. I can take him if it's too much," Julia offered, her eyes searching mine for a hint of reluctance. I forced a smile. "No, Julia, it's fine. We're fine." But we weren't. Ethan's aloofness was growing into a chasm that I could no longer bridge. His excuses for staying out late became more frequent, his explanations more flimsy. "Evelyn, I'm just grabbing a drink with colleagues. Networking, you know," he would say, his words lacking the conviction they once held. Networking or escaping? I found solace in Henry's company. Our conversations, filled with stories of the past, were a balm to my growing loneliness. In those moments I felt a connection, a belonging that had started to fade with Ethan. One evening, as I helped Henry with his exercises, his voice trembled. "Evelyn, you've been like a daughter to me. I hate to be the cause of any trouble between you and Ethan." I held his hand, assuring him, "Henry, you are not the problem. Please don't think that." But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't Henry. It wasn't even Ethan's late nights. The problem was something far more sinister, a rot that had set in the core of our marriage. Ethan's indifference was now a gaping hole, swallowing any remnants of the love we once shared. His absence, both physical and emotional, left me grappling with a myriad of unanswered questions. Was this our new normal? A life of silent meals, unshared beds, and unspoken words? I lay awake that night, listening to the creaks of the old house, each groan echoing the turmoil in my heart. I missed Ethan, or rather, the Ethan I thought I knew. The man who now lay beside me, lost in his own world, was a stranger. As the days blurred into each other, Ethan's neglect of both Henry and me became more pronounced. His once excited talks about his day at work dwindled to monosyllables. His late-night returns were now expected, and his excuses a mere formality. The gap between us widened, filled with unspoken accusations and stifled emotions. I was living with a ghost, a shadow of the man I married. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I stumbled upon the first thread of the web of deceit Ethan had been weaving. A thread that would unravel everything we had built together. As I lay there, staring into the darkness, I made a decision. I would no longer be a spectator in this crumbling facade of a marriage. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if my suspicions were correct, Ethan would soon learn that some actions have irreversible consequences. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The drama of our lives was about to reach its crescendo. The days turned into a monotonous cycle, with Ethan's apathy casting a shadow over the household. His late returns became so routine that I stopped asking where he had been. The silence between us grew louder, filled with unasked questions and unvoiced suspicions. One Saturday, I decided to confront him. "Ethan, your father feels neglected." "You're hardly here," I said, my voice a mix of frustration and desperation. Ethan scoffed. "He's fine, Evelyn. Stop being so dramatic. I have my life too, you know. His words stung, and I recoiled at his dismissiveness. Was this really the man I had loved for all these years? As I tended to Henry, his gratitude only deepened my resentment towards Ethan. You're too good to us, Evelyn. I'm sorry for my son's behavior, Henry whispered during one of our walks. It's not your fault, Henry. I just wish Ethan could see what he's missing, I replied, my heart heavy with unshed tears. Julia's visits became my solace, her presence a stark contrast to Ethan's indifference. Evelyn, if you ever need to talk, I'm here, she offered one afternoon as we sipped tea in the garden. I nodded, grateful for her support, but too proud to admit how much Ethan's neglect was affecting me. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday evening. Ethan had not returned home and his phone went straight to voicemail. Worried, I waited up, the clock ticking away my patience. He stumbled in past midnight, reeking of alcohol. Where were you? I demanded, my worry turning into anger. Just out, Evelyn. Stop being such a nag, he slurred, brushing past me. That word, nag, echoed in my mind, igniting a fire within me. I was not a nag. I was a wife concerned about her crumbling marriage. The following week, my suspicions turned into reality. While cleaning, I found a receipt in Ethan's jacket, a hotel receipt dated for a night he had claimed to be working late. My hands trembled as I read the details. Room service, a bottle of champagne, and a single room for two. The betrayal sliced through me, each word on the receipt a confirmation of Ethan's infidelity. My heart raced, a mixture of anger, pain, and disbelief coursing through me. I confronted him that evening, the receipt clenched in my fist. What is this, Ethan? Explain this to me, I yelled, my composure shattered. Ethan's eyes widened, then narrowed. It's not what you think, Evelyn. It was just a business meeting that went late. A business meeting? With champagne in a hotel room? I spat, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ethan's silence was the only answer I needed. The truth hung in the air, a tangible presence that neither of us could deny. That night I lay awake, the weight of Ethan's betrayal crushing me. I had been a faithful wife, a caring stepdaughter, and yet this was the payment for my loyalty. As dawn broke, a cold resolve settled over me. Ethan had made his choice, and now I would make mine. It was time for Ethan to learn that every action has consequences. I would no longer be the silent victim of his deceit. The plan started to form in my mind, a plan that would shake the very foundation of Ethan's world. He had underestimated me for the last time. Evelyn, the doting wife and caregiver, was about to show Ethan a side of her he had never seen, a side that even I hadn't known existed. The stage was set for my revenge, and I was ready to play my part to perfection. Ethan's days of betrayal were numbered, and he wouldn't even see it coming. Armed with the bitter truth, I was a storm brewing on the horizon. Ethan's betrayal had lit a fire within me, and I was determined to make him pay. My plan for revenge began to take shape, fueled by each lie he had told, each night he had left me alone. Julia visited again, and this time I didn't hold back. Ethan's having an affair, I confessed, the words tasting like poison on my lips. Julia's shock quickly turned to anger. That bastard! How could he do this to you, to Dad? We need to do something, Julia. I won't let him get away with this, I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. We'll figure this out, Evelyn. I'm with you, Julia assured, her hand gripping mine. The opportunity presented itself when Ethan casually mentioned an upcoming business trip. A week in New York. Big project, he said, avoiding my gaze. A week, huh? I mused, a plan forming in my mind. Have a good trip. But it wouldn't be the business trip Ethan was expecting. No, this would be the week when his world would come crashing down. I started my preparations the moment he left. With Julia's help, I gathered evidence of his affair, hotel receipts, phone records, late-night messages. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Next, I contacted a lawyer to discuss divorce and property rights. I would not only leave Ethan, but I would also strip him of everything he held dear. His betrayal had cost him more than just our marriage. It would cost him his home, his comfort, his security. Evelyn, are you sure about this? Julia asked, concern etched on her face. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, a cold determination in my voice. While Ethan was living it up in New York, oblivious to the storm brewing back home, I was executing my plan with precision. The house, Ethan's childhood home, was the first to go. I hired a demolition crew, explaining that the house was old and needed to be torn down for safety reasons. As the bulldozers tore through the walls, I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was more than just a physical demolition. It was symbolic of the destruction of our marriage. Next, I arranged for the sale of the land. The property was in my name, thanks to Ethan's careless handling of the paperwork. The land would fetch a good price, and the money would be mine alone. As the days passed, my plan unfolded flawlessly. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the architect of Ethan's downfall. Finally, the day of Ethan's return arrived. I waited for his call, the anticipation a sweet torture. "Evelyn, where are you? What happened to the house?" Ethan's voice was laced with confusion and panic. "I had it demolished, Ethan. And the land, it's been sold," I replied, each word a dagger to his heart. "What? Why? Evelyn, that was our home," he stammered, his voice a mix of disbelief and despair. "It was a house, Ethan, not a home. And now it's gone, just like our marriage," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But why? How could you do this?" Ethan's plea was pathetic, a far cry from the confident man he once was. "You made your choice, Ethan. Now I've made mine. Goodbye." With that, I hung up, cutting off any further pleas or excuses. As I sat in the silent room, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life. Ethan's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it had also awakened a strength in me that I never knew I had. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And as I looked ahead to my new life, free from lies and deceit, I knew one thing for sure. Ethan would never forget the name Evelyn. Ethan's world had crumbled, and I was the architect of its downfall. The day he returned, I waited, knowing he would confront me. As expected, his car screeched to a halt where our home once stood, now just an empty lot. "What have you done, Evelyn?" Ethan bellowed as he approached, his face a mask of shock and anger. "I've freed myself from a life of lies and deceit," I replied calmly, my resolve unshaken. "This was my childhood home. How could you?" His voice cracked under the weight of his loss. "Your childhood home? You mean the house where you neglected your father and betrayed your wife?" My words were sharp, cutting through the air between us. Ethan staggered as if my words were physical blows. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this." "Talk? Like you talk to your mistress?" I countered, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "You don't understand. It was a mistake," Ethan pleaded, his eyes searching for any sign of the love that once bound us. "A mistake repeated is a choice, Ethan, and you chose her over us, over everything we built together," I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the empty space. Ethan looked around, desperation taking hold. "But where will I go? What about my things?" "Your things are in storage. As for where you'll go, that's no longer my concern," I stated, devoid of any sympathy. "I never thought you could be this cruel." Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Cruel? No, Ethan, I'm not cruel. I'm just no longer your fool," I replied, turning away from the ruins of our past. Ethan's voice faded as I walked away, leaving him amidst the debris of his choices. I had exacted my revenge, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for myself. As I drove away, the weight of the past years seemed to lift off my shoulders. I was no longer bound by Ethan's betrayal or the confines of a loveless marriage. In destroying our physical home, I had built myself a new one, a sanctuary of self-respect and dignity. Ethan had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take away my strength or my ability to start anew. I had closed the chapter on Ethan and our life together. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist, not a victim of someone else's script. Ethan's downfall was the price he paid for his betrayal. As for me, I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom and a chance to rediscover who I was before I lost myself in our marriage. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was a road I looked forward to traveling. Ethan was a part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. The future was mine to shape, and I embraced it with open arms and a heart free of the chains of betrayal. The aftermath of the house's demolition left Ethan in a state of shock and desperation. A few days later he called, his voice laced with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Evelyn, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th, please." I agreed, curious to see how he would try to spin this tale. At the cafe, Ethan sat hunched over, a shadow of his former self. "Evelyn, why are you doing this? You've destroyed everything," he blurted out as I sat down. "Destroyed everything. Ethan, You did that when you chose to have an affair, I replied, my tone even but firm. That was a mistake. But this, what you're doing, it's unforgivable. His voice cracked, his facade of control crumbling. A mistake? No, Ethan. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, not cheating on your wife. I countered sharply. You can't just take everything from me. The house? The money? What about me? Ethan's plea was pathetic, tinged with selfishness. What about you? What about me, Ethan? Or did you forget that there were two people in this marriage? I challenged. Ethan's face contorted with frustration. You're being unreasonable. You're ruining my life over a fling. A fling? Is that what you call breaking our vows, our trust? My voice rose, attracting glances from nearby tables. Evelyn, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with her. We can go to counseling, Ethan offered, desperation seeping into his voice. Fix this? There's nothing left to fix, Ethan. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it, I said, my decision clear and unwavering. I'll lose my job, my reputation. You don't understand the consequences, he pleaded. The consequences? You should have thought of that before. Anish, as for your job and reputation, those were never my concern, I replied, my tone icy. Ethan slumped, defeated. So, what now? A divorce? Yes, a divorce. And since you're so concerned about consequences, I've recorded this conversation. Admitting to your affair will make the proceedings much smoother, I revealed, watching as the color drained from his face. You recorded me? Ethan gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Yes. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions, Ethan. You've lost more than just a house. You've lost a wife who loved you, a family that respected you, and a life that you took for granted, I stated, standing up to leave. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Ethan's voice, calling out to me, was just a distant echo. I had closed that chapter of my life, and there was no turning back. The price of betrayal was high, and Ethan was paying it in full. I had not just sought revenge, I had sought justice for myself. The future was uncertain, but it was a future where I was no longer shackled by Ethan's deceit. I was free, and that freedom was the sweetest victory of all. The dust had settled, and Ethan's world was irrevocably altered. The divorce proceedings were swift, fueled by the incontrovertible evidence of his affair. He tried to argue, to fight, but the truth left him with no ground to stand on. As I sat across from him in the lawyer's office for the final signing, he was a mere shell of the man I once knew. Evelyn, please, can't we rethink this? Ethan's voice was a desperate whisper. There's nothing left to rethink, Ethan. You made your choices, and now I've made mine, I replied, my voice steady and resolute. With each signature, I felt a chapter of my life closing, a chapter filled with pain, betrayal, and ultimately liberation. When it was over, Ethan tried to speak, but I cut him off. There's nothing more to say, Ethan. Goodbye. Leaving the office, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer Ethan's wife. I was Evelyn, free and unbound. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life continued to unravel. His job was lost, a casualty of the scandal. His reputation, once impeccable, was now tarnished by the truth of his indiscretions. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in a small apartment, a stark contrast to the life of comfort he once knew. His mistress had left him, unwilling to deal with the fallout of their affair. Ethan was alone, a consequence of his own making. As for me, I started anew. The money from the sale of the land allowed me financial freedom, and I found peace in my independence. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had long forgotten, and found joy in the small things. Julia and I remained close, our bond strengthened by the trials we faced together. You're stronger than you ever realized, Evelyn, she said to me one evening over dinner. I guess I am, I replied, a smile playing on my lips. My new life was simpler but richer in ways that money couldn't buy. I had respect, dignity, and a sense of self that no one could take from me. Ethan tried to reach out a few times, but I never responded. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no intention of revisiting it. I often thought about the house, the symbol of our broken marriage. In its destruction, I had found my strength. It was a drastic step, but it was necessary for me to break free. Now, looking ahead, I saw a path filled with possibilities. A path where I was the author of my own story, no longer a character in someone else's drama. The road to recovery was not easy, but it was mine to travel. I had survived the storm, and in its wake I found a peace I never knew existed. Ethan's betrayal had shattered me, but in those broken pieces I found myself, and that was the greatest victory of all. I was folding laundry in the quiet of our suburban home when the phone rang. It was an ordinary Thursday, but that phone call was about to shatter the mundanity of my life. I wiped my hands on my apron as I answered. "Hey, Mom, it's Lucas," came the voice of my son, who had ventured out into the world, leaving the nest for college 2 years ago. "Lucas, darling, is everything okay?" I asked, a smile naturally forming on my lips at the sound of his voice. There was a pause, a hesitation I wasn't used to with Lucas. "Mom, I need to ask you something. Where's Dad these days?" I frowned slightly, puzzled. "Your father?" "He's been really busy with work. He's staying at the company's apartment for a while." "Why do you ask?" Another pause, longer this time. Lucas's voice, when it came, was laden with uncertainty. "Mom, I think Dad's company doesn't have any company apartments." My heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" "Well, I was at this job fair, and I overheard some people talking about Dad's company. They said there aren't any company apartments. Mom, is it possible that Dad is lying to us?" The room suddenly felt colder, the walls closing in. I struggled to maintain my composure. "Lucas, are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood." "No, Mom, I'm sure, and I think Dad is seeing someone else." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Lucas, that's a serious accusation. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "I wish I were, Mom. I saw Dad with this woman younger, maybe in her 20s. They seemed close. Too close." My hands trembled, the phone almost slipping from my grasp. The man I had spent 20 years of my life with, could he really betray us like this? "Mom, are you there?" Lucas's voice was laced with concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Yes, I'm here. Lucas, thank you for telling me. I need some time to think about this. We'll figure this out, Mom. I'm here for you," he said firmly. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the unfinished laundry forgotten. My mind raced with questions and fears. Had I been so blind? Was the love and trust I invested in my marriage a mere facade? The thought of Mark with another woman, especially someone Lucas's age, churned my stomach. I had to find out the truth. But how? The idea of confronting Mark terrified me. Yet the thought of living in ignorance was even worse. I needed answers, and I was determined to get them, no matter how painful they might be. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that my once peaceful life was now on the brink of a storm, and I had to brace myself for whatever was coming. Saturday morning dawned with a heaviness that seemed to mirror my mood. Mark was due to visit this weekend, but the thought no longer brought me joy. The words of my son, Lucas, echoed in my mind, tainting every memory I had of Mark. As I prepared breakfast, the doorbell rang. It was my in-laws, George and Helen, arriving for their weekly visit. Despite the turmoil within, I greeted them with a forced smile. "Emma, dear, you look a bit off. Is everything all right?" Helen asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Just a headache," I lied, unwilling to burden them with my suspicions. We sat around the breakfast table, chatting about mundane things. But my heart wasn't in it. My gaze kept drifting to Mark's empty chair, a stark reminder of the growing distance between us. When the topic turned to Mark, Helen's tone was warm. "He's been working so hard lately. You must be proud of him, getting that big project at the office." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, very proud." George, always the jovial one, chimed in. "Remember how he used to say he'd be a big shot one day? Looks like he was right." Their pride in their son was palpable, and it twisted the knife in my heart further. How could I shatter this image they had of Mark? The loving son, the dedicated husband. But beneath that facade lay a different truth, one that Lucas had unwittingly uncovered. As they continued to praise Mark, a part of me wanted to scream, to tell them that their perfect son was a liar, a cheat. But I couldn't, not without proof. The rest of their visit passed in a blur. I was there, but not really. My mind was elsewhere, caught in a storm of betrayal and hurt. After they left, I found myself wandering through the house, lost in thought. Our home, once a haven of love and security, now felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. I stumbled upon a photo album, pages filled with pictures of happier times. Mark and I laughing, holding each other. Was it all just a lie? Had I been living a dream while he lived a double life? That evening, as I lay in bed, sleep eluded me. I realized that I couldn't let this go. I needed to confront Mark, to hear the truth from his lips. Whatever that truth might be, I was ready to face it. I had to be. For my own sanity. And deep down, a part of me yearned for revenge. If Mark had shattered our vows, then he didn't deserve my silence. He didn't deserve the facade of a happy family that I had helped build. As the night deepened, so did my resolve. I would confront Mark, and if my fears were confirmed, he would pay for his betrayal. In what way, I wasn't sure yet, but he would pay. Monday arrived with a sense of foreboding. I had spent the weekend in turmoil, oscillating between denial and a desire for the truth. Today I decided I would confront Mark. As the clock ticked closer to the time Mark was due to arrive, my anxiety grew. My hands trembled as I prepared coffee, each spoonful of sugar sounding unnervingly loud in the silent kitchen. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Mark stood there, his smile faltering slightly as he noticed my somber expression. "Emma, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping inside. I led him to the living room, my heart pounding. "We need to talk, Mark." He looked concerned now, his eyes searching mine. "Of course, anything." I took a deep breath, the words I had rehearsed all weekend spilling out. "Lucas called. He said something disturbing about you being unfaithful." Mark's reaction was immediate, his face flushed, his eyes darting away. "Lucas said what? That's ridiculous, Emma." But his denial lacked conviction, his voice betraying him. I pressed on, the hurt and anger giving me strength. "He saw you, Mark, with a younger woman. He's convinced you're having an affair." Mark's posture stiffened, his expression hardening. "Lucas is mistaken. I can't believe you'd think I'd do something like that." But the more he denied, the clearer the truth became. His body language, the evasion in his eyes, it all pointed to one painful reality. Mark was lying. "Are you really going to stand there and lie to me, Mark?" My voice trembled with emotion. "After all these years, you owe me the truth." For a moment he looked like he might confess. But then his face closed off, his voice cold. "I have nothing to confess, Emma. If you choose to believe Lucas over me, then that's your problem." His words felt like a slap in the face. The man I had loved, trusted, and supported was now a stranger, hiding behind a veil of lies and deceit. The conversation spiraled into an argument, accusations and denials flying. But no confession came. Mark maintained his innocence, even as his lies crumbled around him. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, I ended the confrontation. "I can't do this anymore, Mark. I don't know who you are." Mark left, his departure leaving a cold void in the house. I sat there alone, the weight of his betrayal crushing me. But amidst the pain, a fire was kindling within me. A fire fueled by betrayal and the desire for revenge. Mark had chosen to deceive and hurt me. Now, it was my turn to make him pay for his lies. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined. Mark would not get away with this. He would feel the consequences of his actions, just as I was feeling the pain of his betrayal. The days following my confrontation with Mark were a blur of emotions. Betrayal, anger, and disbelief swirled within me, a constant storm. But amidst the chaos, a new resolve was forming. I wouldn't be a victim. I would fight back. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table going through our finances, the reality of my situation became starkly clear. Mark had always controlled the money, and now I was left with barely enough to cover the bills. The thought of asking him for more was intolerable. Determined, I decided to take control of my life. I started looking for a job, something I hadn't done since before Lucas was born. I scoured the classifieds, sent out resumes, and finally I got a call for an interview at a local retail store. The interview day arrived, and as I sat across from the store manager, Mr. Thompson, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. His questions were straightforward, and I answered them as best as I could, emphasizing my eagerness to learn and adapt. "You've been out of the workforce for a while," Mr. Thompson noted, his tone neutral. "Yes," I admitted, "but I'm ready to start again. I'm hardworking and quick to learn." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression softening. "All right, Mrs. Thompson, we're willing to give you a chance." Gratitude flooded through me. This was more than a job. It was a step towards my independence. As I started working, I found a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. Each day at the store was challenging, but it was also liberating. I was making my own money, no longer solely dependent on Mark. However, my newfound independence seemed to irk Mark. He started calling me, his tone oscillating between condescension and anger. "Why do you need to work?" he sneered during one call. "I provide for you, don't I? Or are you trying to make a point?" His words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. "I'm working because I want to be independent, Mark. I'm not your puppet anymore." There was a pause, and then he laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "Well, if you're so independent, maybe I should stop supporting you altogether. See how you like that." The threat was clear, but I refused to be intimidated. "Do what you must, Mark. I will survive, with or without your support." After that call, Mark cut the financial support he had been giving me. It was a blow, but not an unexpected one. I tightened my belt, budgeted rigorously, and focused on my job. As the days passed, my anger towards Mark turned into something else, a burning desire for revenge. He thought he could control me, break me, but he was wrong. I was stronger than he knew. I started to plan, to think of ways to expose him for what he was. A cheater, a liar, a manipulator. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. The opportunity for my revenge presented itself unexpectedly. Mark's parents, George and Helen, invited us for a family dinner, a tradition we had maintained for years. This time, however, the dinner was anything but ordinary for me. It was the stage where Mark's facade would crumble. I arrived early to help with preparations, my heart heavy yet determined. Helen noticed my subdued mood, but attributed it to stress. Little did she know the turmoil that churned within me. As we were setting the table, the doorbell rang. It was Mark, his usual confident self, unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. Following him was Lucas, my son, the bearer of the truth. Dinner commenced with light conversation, but the air was heavy with unspoken words. I glanced at Lucas, giving him a subtle nod. It was time. Lucas cleared his throat, commanding the attention of the table. "There's something I need to say, something about Dad." Mark laughed it off. "What is it, son? Another one of your pranks?" But Lucas's expression was grave. "No, Dad, this is serious. I saw you with another woman. Not just once, multiple times." The room went silent. Mark's face turned ashen, his confident demeanor faltering. "What are you talking about, Lucas?" "That's nonsense," Mark stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Lucas's gaze was unwavering. "I saw you, Dad. You were with her at a hotel. She's young, about my age. You can't deny it." Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. George's face hardened, his eyes narrowing at Mark. "Is this true, Mark? Are you cheating on Emma?" Helen's voice was a whisper, laced with disbelief and pain. Mark's facade finally broke. He looked from face to face, realizing the gravity of the situation. "It's not what you think. She's just a colleague." But his weak defense fell on deaf ears. The damage was done. George stood up, his voice thundering. "You bring shame to this family. How could you do this to Emma, to your own son?" Mark tried to argue, to justify his actions, but his words were empty, hollow. The truth was laid bare for all to see. I watched, a mix of satisfaction and sorrow in my heart. Mark had been exposed. His betrayal, his lies, all out in the open. But the pain it caused his parents, the disappointment in Lucas's eyes, was a bitter pill to swallow. The dinner ended abruptly, the family shattered by the revelation. Mark left, his head hung low, his image as the perfect son, the perfect husband, destroyed. As I drove home that night, a part of me felt vindicated, but another part grieved for the loss of the family I once knew. Yet amidst the chaos, I knew one thing for certain. Mark would pay for his betrayal. This was just the beginning of his downfall. The fallout from the dinner was immediate and far-reaching. Mark's betrayal had not only fractured our family, but also stained his reputation. His parents, once his staunchest supporters, were now his fiercest critics. In the following weeks, I watched as Mark's life began to unravel. His affair, once hidden in the shadows, was now public knowledge, and the consequences were devastating. His work suffered, friends distanced themselves, and even our son, Lucas, struggled to come to terms with his father's actions. But amidst the chaos, a plan formed in my mind, a plan for retribution. Mark had taken so much from me, it was time he understood the pain he had inflicted. I began by reaching out to a lawyer, a friend from before I married Mark. I explained my situation, the years of emotional neglect, and Mark's recent infidelity. She was sympathetic and immediately offered to help. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve, Emma. It's time for Mark to face the consequences of his actions, she said with determination. Armed with legal support, I confronted Mark about a divorce. He was taken aback, his arrogance faltering under the weight of his crumbling world. Emma, please, let's talk about this. I know I made a mistake, but I can change, he pleaded, a shadow of his former self. But I was resolute. It's too late for that, Mark. You've made your choices, and now you must live with them. The divorce proceedings were messy, as Mark tried to cling to his rapidly diminishing assets. But my lawyer was relentless, and in the end, I was awarded a significant portion of our shared assets, including the house. As Mark's world crumbled, I began to rebuild mine. The divorce had granted me a substantial settlement, which I used to secure my financial independence. I continued working, finding solace and strength in my newfound autonomy. The final blow to Mark came unexpectedly. His affair with the younger woman, now his only solace, ended abruptly. She left him, unable to cope with the public scrutiny and the reality of being with a man whose life was in ruins. Mark was left alone, a shadow of the man he once was. His career, his reputation, his personal life, all had fallen apart because of his choices. As for me, I found peace in my independence. I reconnected with old friends, explored new hobbies, and even began dating again, something I hadn't thought possible. The path to healing was long and fraught with challenges, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Mark's betrayal had broken me, but in the end, it had also freed me. I had faced my deepest fears and come out victorious. And though I took no pleasure in Mark's downfall, there was a sense of justice in seeing him face the consequences of his actions. He had chosen his path, and now he had to walk it alone. As I looked to the future, I knew that new horizons awaited me, horizons filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a life lived on my terms. I remember the day as if it were yesterday. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a beautiful backdrop to what I thought would be the happiest news of my life. My name is Laura, and back then, I was living a life that was about to take an unexpected turn. I used to dream of the stage, the lights, the applause. My days were filled with rehearsals and performances with my local drama club. But all that changed when I met Michael. He was charming, successful, and, as I later found out, controlling. He made it clear, if I wanted a life with him, my acting dreams had to go. Torn between love and passion, I chose him. Fast forward 10 years, our marriage had its ups and downs, but nothing prepared me for that evening. I stood in our kitchen, a pregnancy test hidden in my pocket, a positive result that I couldn't wait to share. I had even bought a small chocolate cake, our favorite, to celebrate the news. But Michael walked in with a tired look and something far more life-altering than my news, divorce papers. He didn't even wait for me to speak. "I want a divorce, Laura," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I was stunned, the words echoing in my head. "What? Why now?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "It's not sudden, Laura. I've been thinking about this for a long time," he replied, avoiding my gaze. I felt my world crumbling. "But why? Is there someone else?" The question burned in my throat. "Just, let's get divorced," he said, refusing to answer. The joy of my pregnancy evaporated in that instant, leaving me with a heartache so profound that I couldn't even speak of the baby. I just stood there, holding back tears, as he walked away, leaving me with nothing but the unsigned divorce papers and a shattered heart. That was the last thing Michael said to me, not knowing about the child growing inside me. I ended up single again, but this time with a life growing inside me. And maybe, just maybe, it was this unborn child that gave me the strength to endure what was to come. The following years were a blur of sleepless nights and tireless days. Being a single mother was hard, but Emily, my little angel, made every struggle worth it. She had her father's eyes, but thankfully nothing else of him. She was my joy, my miracle. Then, 5 years later, life decided to throw me another curveball. I was at the local supermarket, Emily in tow, when I saw him, Michael. He looked different, disheveled, like life hadn't been kind to him. He was with a young woman, probably in her late 20s, clinging to his arm. The sight of them together twisted something inside me. "Hey, long time no see," he said, a smirk on his face. I forced a smile. "Michael, you've changed." "Yeah, life happens. Who's this?" he asked, nodding at Emily. "My daughter, Emily," I replied, my voice steady. He looked at Emily, then back at me, a puzzled expression crossing his face. Your daughter? When? After our divorce, I said simply. The young woman laughed mockingly. Oh, the ex-wife. So this is the kid? Emily looked up at me, her big eyes filled with questions. I squeezed her hand, a silent promise that I'd protect her from the pain I once felt. Michael just shrugged, his attention already back on his companion. Let's go, Karen. We don't have all day. As they walked away, I looked down at Emily, her innocent face a stark contrast to the ugliness we had just encountered. In that moment, I knew that no matter what, I would never let Michael hurt her, as he had hurt me. Life after Michael was a series of challenges and triumphs. I raised Emily, my little star, on my own. Each day brought new adventures, and each night when I tucked her into bed, I felt a sense of accomplishment that no acting role could ever give me. One day when Emily was 6, she came home from school, her face lit up with excitement. "Mommy, my teacher says I'm good at acting. She wants me to be in the school play." Hearing those words, I felt a mix of pride and a pang of my long-buried dreams. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, hugging her tight. "You'll be amazing." As Emily's interest in acting grew, so did her talent. She was a natural, reminding me of my own youthful aspirations. I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. The child I had with the man who made me give up acting was now following in my footsteps. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. One autumn afternoon, as Emily and I walked home from her drama class, we ran into Michael again. He was alone this time, looking even more worn out than before. "Laura, Emily, fancy seeing you here," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, my tone cold. "Just saying hello. Is that a crime?" he replied, a defensive edge to his voice. Emily hid behind me, peeking out curiously. Michael's gaze fell on her, and for a moment his facade cracked, revealing a hint of regret. "You never told me about her," he said softly. "There was nothing to tell. You made your choice," I responded, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. Michael's eyes hardened. "I guess I did, but seeing her now, she's mine too, isn't she?" I felt a surge of protectiveness. "She's my daughter. You lost any claim to her when you walked out on us." He scoffed. "I see you're still bitter. But remember, Laura, blood is thicker than water." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving a chilling promise hanging in the air. I hugged Emily closer, a sense of foreboding settling in my heart. That night, as I watched Emily sleep, I promised myself I would do whatever it took to keep her safe from Michael's toxic influence. He had already taken my dreams. I wouldn't let him take my daughter's future too. The encounter with Michael lingered in my mind like a bad aftertaste. But life had to go on. Emily's play was approaching, and she was the star. The night of the performance, the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. I sat in the front row, my heart swelling with pride as Emily took the stage. She was a natural, her performance flawless, her joy infectious. After the play, as we were leaving, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning around, I was met with the last person I wanted to see, Michael. "Great show," he said, his voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. "What are you doing here, Michael?" I asked, my tone icy. "I wanted to see my daughter perform. She's got talent, just like her mother," he replied, a smirk on his face. I bristled at his words. "Emily is nothing like me. She's her own person." He leaned in closer, his breath reeking of arrogance. "Come on, Laura, we both know she got that talent from you, and now it's my turn to be part of her life." His words sent a chill down my spine. "You gave up that right a long time ago." Michael laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Rights can be reclaimed, Laura, especially when it comes to family." Just then, Emily ran up to us, her face glowing. "Mommy, did you see me? I was a princess." I smiled at her, pushing my fear aside. "You were wonderful, sweetie." Michael crouched down to her level. "You were amazing, Emily. Daddy's very proud of you." Emily looked at him, confusion etched on her face. "Daddy?" I quickly intervened. "Emily, this is Michael. We used to know each other." Michael stood up, his eyes locking with mine. "We'll see each other again, Laura. This isn't over." As he walked away, I hugged Emily tightly, a sense of dread washing over me. Michael's words echoed in my head, a warning of the storm that was about to hit our lives. I had fought hard to build a peaceful life for Emily and me. I wasn't about to let Michael destroy it. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Emily's star continued to rise. Her performance at the school play had caught the attention of a local talent agent who offered her small roles in commercials and local TV shows. Emily was thrilled, and so was I, albeit cautiously. My past encounters with Michael had left a lingering shadow over our newfound happiness. Then one day, as we were leaving a studio after a successful audition, I saw him again. Michael stood there, leaning against his car, a smug look on his face. "Laura, I must say, Emily is quite the little star," he said, his eyes gleaming with something akin to greed. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What do you want, Michael?" He stepped forward, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I've been thinking. Emily needs her father now more than ever. Fame can be tough on a kid." I scoffed. "You're hardly father material, Michael. You can't just waltz back into her life because she's on TV now." He smirked. "But I am her father, Laura, and it seems to me that her success could be lucrative." The implication of his words hit me like a slap. "You're unbelievable. You want to profit from your own daughter?" Michael shrugged nonchalantly. "I'm just saying, as her father, I should have a say in her career, and perhaps a share of her earnings." I stepped closer, anger surging through me. "Listen to me, Michael. You are not going to use Emily. She's not your ticket to easy money." His expression hardened. "We'll see about that, Laura. I have rights, and I intend to use them." As he drove away, I felt a cold fear settle in my heart. Michael was serious, and I knew he wouldn't stop at anything to get what he wanted. I had to protect Emily, not just as her mother, but also from the man who claimed to be her father. A man who saw his own daughter as nothing more than a means to an end. The threat Michael posed became all too real in the following days. I received a letter from a law firm, cold and formal, stating Michael's intention to claim parental rights and a portion of Emily's earnings. My hands trembled as I read it. The audacity of the man I once loved now seeking to exploit our daughter was chilling. I immediately sought legal counsel. The lawyer, a stern yet kind-hearted woman named Miss Thompson, listened to my story with a furrowed brow. "Don't worry, Laura. We'll fight this. He may be her biological father, but his intentions are clear. It's about money, not Emily's well-being." The day of the court hearing arrived. I sat there, clutching Emily's hand, as Michael and his lawyer presented their case. He spoke of his rights as a father, his voice oozing insincerity. "I only want what's best for my daughter," Michael proclaimed, shooting a glance at Emily, who shrank back in her seat. When it was our turn, Miss Thompson was formidable. "Your Honor, Mr. Michael here showed no interest in Emily until he learned of her budding career. His intentions are not parental care, but financial gain." The judge looked over at Michael, skepticism in his eyes. "Mr. Michael, what have you done to build a relationship with Emily since your divorce?" Michael stuttered. "Well, I've been busy, but I always cared." "Your Honor, he's lying," I blurted out, unable to contain myself. "He never cared until now." The judge nodded slowly, making notes. After a tense hour, he delivered his judgment. Michael's petition was denied. The relief that washed over me was indescribable, but as we left the courthouse, Michael's eyes met mine, burning with fury and defeat. "You'll pay for this, Laura," he hissed under his breath. I tightened my grip on Emily's hand, whispering to her that everything would be okay. But as we walked away, I knew this wasn't over. Michael's revenge would come in another form, and I needed to be ready. My only goal was to protect Emily, whatever the cost. In the wake of the court decision, a deceptive calm settled over our lives. Emily's career continued to flourish, and for a moment it seemed like we could finally move past Michael's shadow. But that peace was shattered one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was running late from work, and Emily was at a photo shoot with her manager, Molly. As I hurried towards the studio, my phone rang. It was Molly, her voice laced with panic. "Laura, it's Emily. She's gone." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, gone?" "Michael, he took her." I only looked away for a second, and Molly's voice broke. Rage and fear gripped me. "I'm on my way." I arrived at the studio to find police cars and a crowd of onlookers. Molly was in tears. "I'm so sorry, Laura. I tried to stop him, but he pushed me away." The police took our statements, and I described Michael with a cold fury I didn't recognize in myself. As the reality of the situation sank in, my fear for Emily turned into something fiercer. I wouldn't let Michael harm our daughter. The next hours were a blur of police questions, flashing lights, and the growing pit of fear in my stomach. I posted on social media pleading for any information on Emily's whereabouts. The response was overwhelming. Emily's fans mobilized, sharing the post, offering help, and providing leads. Then a breakthrough came. Karen, Michael's girlfriend, reached out. She had seen my post and, in a turn of conscience, provided Michael's location. Armed with this information, the police moved swiftly. They found Michael in a rundown motel, Emily unharmed but scared. As they arrested Michael, I held Emily tight, promising her that she was safe now, that I would never let anything like this happen again. The aftermath was a whirlwind of media attention. Michael was charged with kidnapping, but his lawyer argued for a lesser sentence, citing emotional distress. The thought of him getting away with a slap on the wrist was unbearable. But Emily's agency, worried about the public's perception, urged for a settlement. Reluctantly, I agreed, but on one condition. Michael would have no rights to Emily, legally or financially. The settlement was a hollow victory. Michael was free, but his reputation was in tatters. The story of his greed and callousness spread, and he lost his job. Shunned by friends and colleagues, he became a pariah. As for Emily, her bravery and resilience only endeared her more to her fans. Her career continued to soar, and through it all, she remained grounded. Her sweet smile a constant reminder of the strength and love that had carried us through the darkest of times. My name is Emily Harrison. At 35, I've carved out a life balancing being a mother to a vibrant 5-year-old son and working in the business my parents built from scratch. My husband, Daniel, had always been the pillar I leaned on, or so I thought. I still remember the evening that shattered everything. We were at dinner, the clinking of cutlery mingling with our son's laughter. That's when Daniel dropped the bombshell. "You work for your parents who didn't even finish high school? That's embarrassing, Emily," he said, his fork pausing midair. I choked on my water. "What? Why does that matter now?" Daniel shrugged, a look of disdain creeping onto his face. "I just thought you came from a more educated family. It's not a good look, associating with dropouts." I stared at him, my heart pounding. This was the man who'd vowed to love and respect me, the man who'd embraced my parents like his own. Yet here he was, sneering at their life's work. "But they've built a successful company, Daniel. They worked hard for everything we have," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He scoffed. "Hard work? Please. They probably just got lucky. It's not like they had the brains to do something significant." The words stung like a slap. I looked across the table, at our son who was blissfully unaware, munching on his food. How could I explain to him one day that his father looked down on his grandparents? "Daniel, they're my parents. You've known them for years. Why are you saying this now?" My voice was a whisper, laced with disbelief and pain. He leaned back, his eyes cold. "I guess I just never realized how limited their education was. It's not something to be proud of, Emily, and frankly, it reflects poorly on us." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man sleeping beside me felt like a stranger. His words echoed in my mind, each syllable a sharp jab at my heart. My parents, who'd sacrificed everything to give me a life they never had, were now a source of shame for my husband. The Emily who had fallen in love with Daniel couldn't reconcile with this new reality. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping. This was just the beginning, the first crack in the facade of our seemingly perfect life. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and cold silences. Daniel's disdain for my family had seeped into every aspect of our lives. I watched as the man I married transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone who found pleasure in belittling others. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Daniel walked in, his face stern. "Emily, we need to talk about your job," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "What about my job, Daniel?" He leaned against the counter, his eyes cold. "I think it's time you considered quitting. Be a full-time housewife. It's not like your job at that rinky-dink company means anything." I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger. "My job means a lot to me, Daniel. My parents built that company from nothing. It's important." He laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Important? Please, Emily. It's a small-time operation. You'd be better off focusing on our home." I shook my head, disbelief and anger intertwining. "I won't quit my job, Daniel. It's part of who I am." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Who you are. You're my wife, Emily. Your place is here, with our son. not wasting time at some dead-end job. I stared at him, the man I no longer recognized. My parents' business isn't dead-end, and I am not just your wife, I am also a daughter and a professional. His laughter echoed in the kitchen. Professional? That's a good one. You're playing at a job, Emily. Time to grow up and see what's really important. That night, I lay awake, the words and laughter haunting me. It was clear that Daniel's arrogance and contempt knew no bounds. His disregard for my identity, my family, and my aspirations was not just painful, it was suffocating. As the days turned into weeks, the idea of a life without Daniel started to grow in my mind. A life where I didn't have to defend my parents or my choices. A life where my son wouldn't hear his father mock his grandparents. But I knew that leaving Daniel wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand the pain he caused, to feel the sting of his own venom. I needed to stand up for my parents, for myself. The storm was rising, and I was ready to face it head-on. Daniel's promotion at work brought a new wave of arrogance that was unbearable. He strutted around the house like a peacock, his ego inflated to the point of bursting. One Saturday morning, as I was preparing breakfast, he sauntered into the kitchen with a smirk. "Guess who just got a big promotion? This means we're moving up in the world, Emily." I forced a smile, trying to keep the peace. "That's great, Daniel. Congratulations." He poured himself a coffee, his smirk widening. "With this raise, you really don't need to work anymore. You can finally quit that silly job of yours." I stiffened, my spoon clattering against the pan. "We've been over this, Daniel. I'm not quitting my job." He leaned against the counter, his gaze piercing. "You're still on about that? Emily, be reasonable. You won't have to lift a finger. I can provide everything." The condescension in his voice was like a slap. "It's not about the money, Daniel. I work because I love my job. It's part of who I am." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Love your job? That's just sentimental nonsense. You need to start thinking about what's best for our family." I turned off the stove, my hands trembling. "And what if I think working is what's best for me? For our family?" His eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish, Emily. You're not seeing the big picture. It's time you started acting like a proper wife and mother." The words hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about control, about Daniel dictating how I should live my life. I looked at him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And what if I don't want the life you're offering?" His expression darkened. "Is that a threat, Emily?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's a promise. I won't let you or anyone else dictate my life." The air between us was electric, charged with unspoken threats and shattered illusions. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The man I married was gone, replaced by a stranger with whom I shared a house but not a life. As he left the room, the silence was deafening. But within me, a plan was forming. A plan to reclaim my life, to show Daniel he couldn't trample over me. The seeds of revenge were sown, watered by every condescending word and every dismissive gesture. It was time for Daniel to learn that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. The following weeks were a tense chess game with Daniel. His arrogance reached new heights, but I was busy laying the groundwork for what was to come. One day, I was called into an unexpected meeting at work. My father looked grave as he introduced me to Mr. Anderson, a project manager from a collaborating firm. "Emily, we have a serious issue," my father began, his voice heavy with concern. "It's about a project your husband is leading." My heart sank. "What about it?" Mr. Anderson cleared his throat, his expression grim. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Daniel has been manipulating the project for his gain." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "He's been diverting resources to another firm, and there are rumors of him being involved with someone from that company," Mr. Anderson said hesitantly. The room spun around me. "An affair?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "We can't confirm that," my father interjected, his face etched with worry. "But the evidence against him is quite damning." I sat there numb. The man I had married, the father of my child, was not only jeopardizing my family's business, but possibly having an affair. Rage bubbled inside me, a burning, seething cauldron of betrayal and hurt. "What do you plan to do?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "We need to gather more evidence," Mr. Anderson said, "but we need to be discreet. If Daniel realizes we're onto him, he might cover his tracks." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "I'll help. He won't suspect me. Over the next few days, I played the dutiful wife, while secretly gathering evidence with Mr. Anderson and my father. Each document I found, every covert conversation I overheard, was another piece in the puzzle of Daniel's deceit. But it wasn't just about the project anymore. I needed to know the truth about the alleged affair. If Daniel could betray my family's business, what else was he capable of? I hired a private investigator, my resolve steeling with every passing day. If Daniel was leading a double life, I would expose him for the fraud he was. The day the investigator handed me the envelope felt surreal. Inside were photos and messages that confirmed my worst fears. Daniel was indeed having an affair. Tears of anger and hurt blurred my vision as I looked at the pictures. But amidst the pain, there was clarity. Daniel had underestimated me for the last time. It was time for his house of cards to come tumbling down. Armed with the truth, my determination to bring Daniel down became unshakable. I met with Mr. Anderson and my father, our meeting charged with a sense of urgency. "We have enough to go public with his misconduct," Mr. Anderson said, his voice grim. "But we need to be strategic about this." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. We can't just expose his professional misconduct. We need to reveal his personal betrayal as well. It has to be a complete takedown. My father looked at me, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "Emily, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to get ugly." I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of resolve. He made it personal when he betrayed our family. I'm ready. Over the next few days, we meticulously planned our course of action. Mr. Anderson gathered the necessary evidence from the project, while I compiled the proof of Daniel's affair. The plan was to confront him at his company, where he could not escape the consequences of his actions. The day of reckoning came swiftly. Daniel left for work, unaware that his world was about to crumble. I arrived at his office with Mr. Anderson and my father, our faces set in determination. We confronted him in the conference room, the evidence laid out like a damning mosaic of his deceit. Daniel's face paled as he realized the extent of our knowledge. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" Daniel blustered, trying to regain his composure. "No joke, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "We know everything. The sabotage of the project, the affair. All of it." He scoffed, trying to brush it off. "You have no proof." Mr. Anderson stepped forward, laying out the documents and photos. "We have all the proof we need. Your career is over, Daniel." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, desperation creeping into his expression. "You can't do this to me. I've worked too hard to get here." I looked at him, my heart void of any affection I once had. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed us all." The meeting ended with Daniel being escorted out of the building, his career in tatters. As he passed me, his eyes met mine, a mixture of shock, anger, and defeat in his gaze. I didn't flinch. This was the price of his betrayal, a price he had to pay. As I left the building, the weight of the last few weeks began to lift. Daniel was out of my life, professionally and personally. It was time to rebuild, to focus on my son and my work. But above all, it was time to heal. The aftermath of Daniel's exposure was like a storm that swept through our lives, leaving a trail of revelations and consequences. His professional disgrace was just the beginning. A few days after the confrontation, I received a call from Daniel. His voice, once confident and arrogant, was now laced with desperation. "Emily, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything," he pleaded. I held the phone tightly, my resolve unwavering. "There's nothing to explain, Daniel. I've seen the evidence. It's over." "You can't do this to me. You're ruining my life." His voice rose in anger. "You did this to yourself," I replied, the bitter taste of betrayal still fresh. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." He was silent for a moment, then his tone changed, becoming more sinister. "If you think you can get away with this, you're wrong. I won't let you destroy me." The threat hung in the air, but I wasn't intimidated. "I'm not afraid of you, Daniel. You've lost your power over me." I hung up, feeling a sense of empowerment. Daniel's threats were empty, the last gasps of a man who had lost everything. The news of Daniel's affair and professional misconduct spread, and the reactions were immediate. His social circles shunned him, and his professional network crumbled. The man who had prided himself on his image and status was now a pariah, his reputation in tatters. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. as Daniel had little ground to stand on. I was awarded full custody of our son and a significant portion of our shared assets. But it wasn't the financial settlement that gave me satisfaction. It was the knowledge that Daniel's downfall was of his own making. He had underestimated me, thinking he could control and belittle me without consequence. In the end, it was his arrogance that led to his undoing. He had sowed the seeds of his destruction, and I had merely helped them grow. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to a new beginning, a future where I was free from Daniel's shadow, free to be myself and provide a better life for my son. Daniel's fall from grace was a stark reminder of the price of betrayal and arrogance, a price he would continue to pay long after our paths had diverged. The finality of the divorce brought a mixture of relief and reflection. The house, once filled with tension and discord, now resonated with a quiet peace. My son and I adjusted to our new life, one where laughter began to replace the echoes of arguments. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs, my son looked up at me, his eyes curious. "Mom, why don't we see Daddy anymore?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes people change, honey, and sometimes it's better to be apart than together." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and turned his attention back to the photos. In his simple acceptance, I found a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The business thrived as I invested more of myself into it, my parents' legacy becoming a testament to resilience and hard work. The community rallied around us, their support a stark contrast to the isolation that Daniel now faced. Rumors reached me occasionally about Daniel's struggles. His career had stalled, his social circles had evaporated, and the woman he had an affair with had left him. It seemed that the life he had chosen was crumbling around him. I felt a sense of poetic justice in his downfall, but it didn't bring me joy. Instead, it served as a reminder of the cost of deceit and selfishness. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught me invaluable lessons. I learned the importance of standing up for myself, the strength in vulnerability, and the power of letting go. As I looked at my son, growing up so quickly, I knew that the most important lesson I could teach him was respect. Respect for others, for himself, and for the choices people make in life. Daniel had become a distant memory, a chapter closed and left behind. My focus was now on the future, on building a life filled with purpose and joy. In the end, the greatest revenge was not in seeing Daniel's destruction, but in my own reconstruction. In rising from the ashes of our broken marriage, I found a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I had emerged from the storm, not unscathed but undefeated. And in that triumph, I found my peace.